I'd always been told that curiosity killed the cat. No one ever warned me that compassion could wake a king. My name is Nancy Close, and I made a mistake that changed everything. Not the kind of mistake you learn from and move on. The kind that rewrites your entire understanding of reality, of power, of what it means to save something that was never meant to be saved. I live alone in a cabin at the edge of the Blackwood Forest. The kind of alone that people choose after they've lost too much to risk getting attached to anyone else. My husband died 3 years ago in a car accident that statistics said was unlikely, but grief said was inevitable. After that, I couldn't stand the city anymore, couldn't stand the sympathetic looks, the well-meaning offers of help, the assumption that moving on was something I should be doing faster. So I'd come here, to the edge of a forest that locals avoided, where the trees grew so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground, where strange sounds echoed at night that no one could quite identify. People said the forest was cursed, that things went in and didn't come out, that the old stories about wolves and magic weren't just stories, but warnings. I didn't care about the warnings. Isolation suited me. Grief was easier to manage when you didn't have to explain it to anyone. But on the morning of October 13th, 3 years and 2 months after my husband's death, I made the decision to hike deeper into the Blackwood than I'd ever gone before. Not because I was brave, not because I was seeking adventure, because I was numb and hiking was something to do with my body while my mind circled the same painful memories endlessly. I followed an old game trail that wound between ancient trees, their branches forming cathedral ceiling above me. The forest was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made you notice your own breathing, your own heartbeat, the crunch of leaves under your boots. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the silence. Low, pained, the kind of whimper that spoke of suffering so complete it had moved beyond screaming into something more terrible. I should have turned back, should have remembered all those warnings about the forest, about things that lured people deeper with sounds designed to trigger human compassion. Should have recognized that investigating unknown sounds in cursed forest was exactly the kind of behavior that got people killed in horror movies. But grief had made me reckless. 3 years of carefully managed numbness meant I didn't have the self-preservation instincts that fear required. So I followed the sound, pushing through dense undergrowth until I found the source. A wolf, massive, white as fresh snow, beautiful in the way that predators are beautiful, sleek muscle and deadly grace rendered in fur and fawn. But the beauty was marred by horror. Golden chains wrapped around its body, binding it to an ancient oak tree with elaborate cruelty. Not restraining chains meant to hold a dangerous animal. Torture chains, designed to cause maximum suffering while preventing escape. The gold was burning into the wolf's fur, leaving wounds that should have been fatal, but somehow weren't. Blood matted the white coat, making patterns that looked almost deliberate in their artistry. The wolf's breathing was labored, eyes half closed with pain, its massive body trembling with effort just to remain conscious. It was dying, slowly, agonizingly, chained to a tree in the middle of a cursed forest where no one would find it until long after it had stopped suffering. I should have left, should have recognized that wolves bound in gold chains with wounds that burned rather than bled were not natural things requiring natural responses. Should have understood that compassion for supernatural creatures was how cautionary tales began. But I'd spent 3 years watching something die slowly, watching myself die slowly in the aftermath of my husband's death. And I couldn't just walk away and let this creature suffer alone when I had the tools to help. My hiking pack had bolt cutters, industrial-grade ones that I carried for cutting through old fences on the trails, for removing debris from paths, for the kind of practical problems that hiking in rough terrain sometimes created. Never, in any scenario I'd imagined, had I thought I'd use them to free a dying wolf from gold chains in a cursed forest. "I'm going to help you," I said quietly, not knowing if the wolf could understand, or if I was just talking to make myself feel better about the insane thing I was about to do. I don't know what you are or why you're chained here, but I can't just leave you like this. That's not something I can do. Not anymore. Not after. I stopped, not wanting to explain my dead husband to a dying wolf, not wanting to make this about my grief when it should be about ending suffering I had the power to end. I approached carefully, watching for signs of aggression despite the wolf's obvious weakness. But it didn't try to attack, didn't snarl or snap, just watched me with amber eyes that held too much intelligence, too much awareness for a normal animal. The chains were thick, the gold somehow, both burning hot and freezing cold when I touched them. Getting the bolt cutters positioned was difficult, my hands shaking from adrenaline and the strange energy radiating from the metal itself. Last chance to tell me this is a terrible idea, I muttered while working on the first chain. Because I'm pretty sure this is a terrible idea. Freeing dangerous predator from magical restraints in cursed forest definitely seems like the kind of decision that ends badly for the human involved. The wolf made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been pain. I chose to interpret it as encouragement. The first chain broke with sound like shattering glass. Not the metallic snap I'd expected, but something crystalline, magical, wrong. The moment the chains separated, the wolf's breathing eased slightly, some of the burning wounds beginning to close. Okay, I said, moving to the second chain. Okay, that's not natural healing. That's supernatural healing, which means you're supernatural wolf, which I probably should have deduced from the gold chains and the impossible to survive wounds. But grief makes you stupid about obvious things. The second chain broke more easily, my confidence growing despite the insanity of what I was doing. Third chain, fourth, fifth, each one releasing with that strange shattering sound, each one allowing the wolf's wounds to heal slightly more. By the time I reached the final chain, the one wrapped around the wolf's throat like collar meant to strangle slowly, I was committed. There was no backing out now, no pretending I was just helping injured animal and could walk away once the job was done. This was something bigger, something that was going to have consequences I couldn't predict. Last one, I said, positioning the bolt cutters around the throat chain. After this, you're free. And I'm either hero who saved dying creature or idiot who released dangerous predator. Really hoping for the former. The final chain resisted, not physically but magically, pushing back against my efforts with energy that felt almost sentient. I had to use both hands, all my strength, everything I had to force the cutters closed. When the chain finally broke, the sound was deafening. Not shattering glass, but an explosion of magical energy that knocked me backward several feet. I landed hard, the breath driven from my lungs, my vision blurring from the impact. By the time I managed to sit up, gasping for air, the wolf was changing. Not just moving, changing. Shifting from wolf form to something else. Transformation that should have been horrifying, but was somehow beautiful in its absolute impossibility. White fur receding, bones restructuring, massive body condensing into human form. And when the transformation completed, I was no longer looking at a dying wolf. I was looking at a man. Tall, muscular, completely naked, which I tried very hard not to focus on, with silver white hair and those same amber eyes that had watched me cut the chains. His body was still covered in wounds, but they were healing visibly now, the damage caused by the gold chains fading as his human form's natural regeneration took over. He looked at me with expression that mixed pain, confusion, and something that might have been gratitude if gratitude could be fierce and dangerous simultaneously. "You freed me," he said, his voice rough from disuse or pain or both. "You cut the chains when you should have left me to die. Why? What human is foolish enough to release chained alpha from cursed forest without knowing what they're freeing?" "I'm Nancy," I said stupidly, because that seemed like the kind of introduction one made after accidentally releasing shape-shifting man from magical torture chains. "Nancy Close. I live at the edge of the Blackwood. I heard you suffering and I couldn't just leave you. That seemed cruel. more cruel than whatever reason you were chained in the first place. Nancy Close. He tested my name like he was tasting something unfamiliar. You have no idea what you've done, what you've released, what consequences your compassion just set in motion. Then maybe you should explain? Because from my perspective, I just freed dying creature from torture chains. Whatever consequences follow from that seem preferable to the consequence of letting you die slowly in agony. My fear was being replaced by irritation. Apparently near-death experiences made me confrontational. Who are you? Why were you chained? And why is warning me about consequences more important than saying thank you for not leaving you to die? I am Kalen. He said it like I should recognize the name, like it should mean something beyond just being identifier for naked shapeshifter. Alpha King of the Northern Territories. And I was chained because my brother, Damien, wanted my throne and was willing to commit fratricide to get it. The gold chains were designed to kill me slowly while preventing transformation, ensuring I died as wolf rather than man, denying me even the dignity of human death. Your brother tried to kill you by chaining you in a forest with magical torture chains. That's some serious family dysfunction. I was processing too much information too quickly, my brain struggling to accept that shapeshifters and alpha kings and magical assassinations were real things rather than just fantasy novel concepts. And now that I've freed you, what? Your brother is going to hunt you down? Hunt me down for interfering? Are there going to be consequences beyond just awkward family reunions? Damien thinks I'm dead or close enough to dead that it doesn't matter. He's claimed my throne, taken my pack, and convinced everyone that I was killed by enemies of the state rather than by a treacherous brother. Freeing me means, Kalen's expression was grim, means he'll do everything in his power to recapture me before I can reveal his treachery. And anyone who aided my escape becomes a target by association. You, Nancy Close, just became one of the most wanted people in the Northern Territories despite never intending to involve yourself in supernatural politics. Well, I said, struggling to my feet with as much dignity as possible. That's just perfect. I came to the forest to avoid human problems and ended up creating supernatural ones instead. That's exactly my luck. Kalen was standing now too, and I was trying very hard not to stare at the fact that he was still completely naked and apparently unbothered by that fact. You need to leave this forest immediately. Get as far from here as possible before Damien's trackers detect the broken chains and come to investigate. If they find you, if they find me, they'll kill me to prevent me from testifying that you were freed rather than escaping on your own. I understand how witness elimination works, even if I've never dealt with it in supernatural context before. I was pulling my hiking pack back on, adrenaline starting to fade into something more practical. But I'm not leaving you here wounded and alone while your brother's assassins are coming. That seems counterproductive to the whole rescuing you thing I just did. I'm Alpha King. I can defend myself. You're wounded Alpha King who was dying in chains 30 seconds ago. And you're naked, which seems like tactical disadvantage when facing armed enemies. I cut him off with the same decisiveness I'd use cutting the chains. My cabin is 3 miles from here. We go there, get you clothes and proper healing supplies, figure out a plan that doesn't involve both of us dying in a forest because you're too proud to accept help from human who already saved your life once. That seemed reasonable. Kalen stared at me with expression that suggested no one talked to him like that, which made sense given the whole Alpha King thing. Then, surprisingly, he smiled slightly. You're very commanding for human civilian with no understanding of supernatural politics. I'm very tired of watching things die slowly and doing nothing about it. That applies to cursed wolves as much as it applies to my own grief. I started walking back toward the trail. Come on, we need to get moving before your brother's people show up, and I regret every life choice that led to this moment. Behind me, I heard Kalen start to follow. And I tried very hard not to think about the fact that I'd just invited shape-shifting Alpha King back to my isolated cabin after freeing him from magical torture chains in Cursed Forest. This was either the bravest thing I'd ever done or the stupidest. Probably the stupidest. But at least it was something other than grief for the first time in 3 years. That had to count for something. Even if it got me killed by treacherous brother seeking revenge for my interference with his regicide plans. "Nancy Close," Kaylin said as we walked. "You have no idea what you've started. Everyone keeps telling me that. No one's explaining what I've actually started. That seems like poor communication strategy for people claiming I'm in danger." I didn't look back at him. Maybe we can work on that when we get to the cabin. Explanations and clothes. In that order. Clothes and explanations. That seems reasonable. Good. I'm glad we agree. Now let's get out of this cursed forest before something else tries to kill us and I have to rescue you again. Behind me, I swear I heard him laugh. And that's when I knew, whatever I'd released by cutting those chains, it wasn't just powerful. It was something that was going to change my carefully maintained isolation forever. For better or worse remained to be seen. But at least it wouldn't be boring. After 3 years of grief-soaked numbness, not boring sounded pretty good. Even if it came with supernatural politics and homicidal, shape-shifting brothers. Nancy just freed a chained white wolf dying in gold chains in a cursed forest. Turns out the wolf is Alpha King Kaylin, who was betrayed by his brother Damien and left to die. Now Damien's assassins are coming, and Nancy just became target number 1 for interfering. What happens when the woman who saved an Alpha King becomes hunted by the brother who tried to kill him? How is Kaylin going to defend himself while wounded and naked? And what's this mate bond thing that's making them both feel weird? Hit subscribe because this lonely widow just woke up to something powerful and it's about to turn her isolated cabin into ground zero for supernatural civil war. Also, rescuing cursed wolves. Terrible idea, or best terrible idea. My cabin had never felt smaller than it did with a naked, shape-shifting Alpha King standing in my living room, while I frantically searched for clothes that might fit someone approximately twice my size. I don't have anything that's going to fit you properly. I called from my bedroom where I was digging through the closet that still held my dead husband's clothes. Items I kept for 3 years despite knowing I should donate them. My husband was tall, but you're significantly more muscular than he was. This is going to be like putting children's clothes on grown man. Anything is better than nothing, Kaylin replied from the living room, his voice carrying that authoritative tone that suggested he was used to people solving his problems quickly. Damien's trackers will be following the magical signature from the broken chains. We have perhaps an hour before they locate this cabin. I need to be functional before then. I found sweatpants and a flannel shirt that had been my husband's largest options. Items he'd worn for yard work, for comfort, for the casual weekends that I'd loved and lost. Handing them to Kaylin felt strange, like I was giving away pieces of grief I'd been holding on to because letting go meant accepting the loss was permanent. "Here," I said, passing the clothes around the doorframe without looking directly at him. "They'll be tight, but they'll work. Bathroom is down the hall if you want privacy. Privacy is a luxury we don't have time for." I heard rustling as he dressed. "But thank you for the clothes and for the awkward courtesy of not staring while I was undressed. Most humans who encounter Alpha in a vulnerable state are less respectful. Most humans probably haven't spent 3 years in isolation processing grief that makes normal social interactions feel exhausting. I'm not being respectful. I'm being emotionally unavailable in ways that coincidentally resemble politeness. I moved back into the living room now that he was clothed, finding him dressed in my husband's too small clothes, looking like someone had tried to gift wrap a predator. That's not going to fool anyone into thinking you're a human civilian. You look like a warrior wearing farmer's clothing. I look like Alpha King in exile wearing whatever was available. That's an accurate description. Kaylin was examining my cabin with the kind of tactical assessment that suggested he was cataloging exits, weapons, and defensive positions. This location is defensible but not ideal. Single entry point is advantage for controlling access, but disadvantage if we're surrounded. Windows are large enough for escape, but also large enough for entry. And you're isolated enough that screaming for help would accomplish nothing. You're very reassuring about our chances of survival. I'm realistic about tactical situations. Damien's trackers are highly trained warriors specifically selected for the ability to track and eliminate targets. You're a civilian with no combat training, and I'm wounded alpha who hasn't fully recovered from being chained for. He paused, calculation visible in his expression. For approximately 6 weeks, based on the progression of the wounds. That's a significant disadvantage in direct confrontation. 6 weeks. You were chained and dying for 6 weeks, and no one came to help you. The horror of that was almost worse than the initial discovery. What kind of kingdom lets their alpha king disappear for 6 weeks without searching? The kind where the person who should be searching is the one who ordered the chaining in the first place. Kalen's bitterness was obvious. Damien told the pack I was killed by enemies during border negotiations. He produced false evidence, held an elaborate funeral, and claimed the throne as grieving brother honoring my legacy. By the time anyone might have questioned the story, he'd consolidated enough power that questioning became dangerous. That's how usurpers work. Fast consolidation while everyone is too shocked to resist effectively. So we can't just call the authorities or your pack or whoever should be handling this because they all think you're dead and your brother is legitimate ruler. I was pacing now, adrenaline from the forest finally catching up with me, which means we're on our own against trained assassins while you're wounded, and I'm completely unprepared for supernatural conflict. I really freed you at the worst possible time, didn't I? You freed me at the only possible time. Another week in those chains, and I'd have been dead regardless of rescue attempts. Your timing was... Kalen's expression shifted to something more complicated. Your timing was perfect in ways that shouldn't be possible unless... He stopped studying me with sudden intensity that made me uncomfortable. Unless what? Unless you're my fated mate, and the mate bond was guiding you to me despite conscious awareness. That would explain why you could cut the chains when they were designed to be unbreakable by anyone except specific bloodline members. That would explain why I survived 6 weeks of torture that should have killed me in 3. And that would explain why... He moved closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming in my small living room. Why I can feel you. Your emotions, your fear, your determination. That's not normal alpha awareness of humans in proximity. That's mate bond that establishes a connection between us. Mate bond. You think I'm your fated mate. I stepped back, needing distance despite the strange pull I felt toward him. That's not possible. I'm human, grieving widow who lives alone in the woods. I'm not. I can't be fated for anything to the supernatural Alpha King. That's not how my life works. Mate bonds don't care about how you think your life works. They care about compatibility, about connection that transcends species and circumstance, about the moon goddess's designation of who belongs together. Kalen's certainty was absolute. You felt something when you found me. When you cut the chains, a pull, a recognition, something that made leaving me impossible despite every logical reason to walk away. That's the bond manifesting before you understood what it was. He wasn't wrong. I had felt something, connection that I'd attributed to compassion or projection or my own grief, making me sensitive to suffering. But it had been more than that. Deeper, more fundamental, the kind of pull that suggested destiny rather than just coincidence. Even if that's true, even if there's some mate bond thing happening, that doesn't change our immediate problem of assassins tracking us while you're wounded, and I'm useless in combat situations. I was deflecting, avoiding the implications of being fated to someone I just met. Can we focus on survival first and supernatural relationship complications second? We can. Though the mate bond is relevant to survival, because it's what allowed you to free me, and it's what will allow us to fight together more effectively than two strangers could. The bond creates intuitive understanding, shared strength, tactical coordination that a sound outside cut him off. Not natural forest sound, mechanical, deliberate, the crunch of multiple vehicles approaching on a rough road that led to my cabin. "They're here," Kalen said, his entire demeanor shifting from explaining mate bonds to preparing for combat. Faster than anticipated. Damien must have had trackers stationed closer to the forest than I expected. "We need to leave now." "Leave and go where?" "You said the forest is cursed. The cabin is defensible, and we're outmatched regardless. Where's the better option?" "Deeper into the Blackwood. There are places Damien's trackers won't follow. Old magic that predates the pack and doesn't answer to current alpha authority. If we can reach the sanctum before they catch us." "The sanctum?" "Ancient place of power where alphas historically went for judgment or sanctuary. It's been sealed for generations, but the mate bond might allow us access. It's risk, but it's better than staying here and being captured." Kalen was already moving toward my back door. "Unless you'd prefer, I surrender to protect you from being targeted as an accomplice." "That's option. They take me and likely leave you alive as civilian with no useful information." "No." The word came out more forcefully than I'd intended. "No, I didn't free you from dying in chains just to let you get recaptured and killed. That defeats the entire purpose of the rescue. We run, together, to this sanctum place, and we figure out how to fix this situation without you dying or me getting killed for helping. That's the plan." "You're very decisive for someone who claims to be emotionally unavailable." "I'm decisive about not letting people die when I can prevent it. That's different from being emotionally available for relationship complications." I was grabbing supplies, first aid kit, water bottles, the hiking gear I'd brought back from the forest. "How long to reach this sanctum?" 4 hours at human pace, 2 hours if you can match alpha speed. Which you shouldn't be able to do without supernatural capability, but the mate bond sometimes allows temporary enhancement of a human partner's abilities. "We'll see how fast you can actually move once we're running for our lives." That's very reassuring. It's honest. Reassurance is a luxury we don't have time for. We left through the back door just as I heard vehicles pulling up to the front of the cabin. Multiple engines, multiple doors opening, multiple voices coordinating search patterns with professional efficiency, suggested Kalen was right about these being trained trackers rather than just random enforcers. "This way," Kalen directed, leading me into the dense forest behind my cabin. "Stay close. Don't look back. Don't stop unless I tell you to. And try not to die. I'm fond of you, and losing my mate immediately after finding her will be tremendously inconvenient." "You're fond of me?" That's the romantic declaration you're going with. I'm wounded Alpha King running from assassins while protecting a newly discovered mate who doesn't believe the bond is real. Romance is going to have to wait until we're not actively fleeing for our lives. Fair point. We ran. Not jogging, not hiking. Actual running, the kind that burned muscles and lungs, that required complete focus on not tripping over roots or branches. And I found, impossibly, that I could keep up. Not easily, not without effort, but I could match Kalen's pace in ways that should have been impossible for a human civilian who hiked occasionally, but wasn't exactly in peak athletic condition. "The bond is enhancing you," Kalen said as we ran, not even breathing hard despite the pace. "Giving you access to supernatural endurance. That's a significant manifestation for this early in bond development. You're more compatible than I anticipated. Can we save the compatibility analysis for when we're not running from people trying to kill us?" That's fair criticism. Behind us, I heard sounds of pursuit, branches breaking, voices calling, coordinates, the organized search of professionals who knew exactly what they were doing and weren't going to be deterred by difficult terrain. "They're gaining," I gasped, my supernatural endurance apparently having limits that Kalen's didn't. I can't maintain this pace indefinitely." "You don't have to. Just 20 more minutes. The sanctum boundary is close. Once we cross it, they can't follow without violating ancient law that even Damien won't risk breaking. 20 minutes, Nancy. You can do 20 minutes. I could do 20 minutes, I repeated, using words like a mantra. 20 minutes. That's manageable. It wasn't manageable. 20 minutes of full speed running while people chased you through cursed forest was definitely not manageable for someone who'd spent 3 years in isolated grief rather than training for supernatural escape scenarios. But I did anyway, because Kalen was right. I was decisive about not letting people die. And that included not letting myself die when I just discovered that maybe, possibly, there was something worth living for beyond just managing grief in isolation. The sanctum appeared suddenly, not gradual transition, but immediate shift from dense forest to cleared space surrounding ancient stone structure that looked like it predated modern architecture by centuries. The building was small, more shrine than fortress, with symbols carved into the stone that I didn't recognize but that made my eyes hurt to look at directly. Inside, Kalen commanded, practically dragging me toward the entrance. Once we crossed the threshold, we're protected. Damien's trackers can't enter without permission from current Sanctum Guardian. And since I'm the rightful Alpha King, that's me. We're safe once we're inside. We crossed the threshold just as the first tracker emerged from the forest behind us. Tall man with cold eyes and weapon I couldn't identify, but that looked very capable of killing efficiently. Kalen, the tracker called, his voice carrying across the clearing. Stand down. Alpha Damien offers terms. Surrender peacefully and the human civilian goes free. Resist and she's eliminated as hostile accomplice. Choose quickly. I choose the option where Damien faces justice for fratricide and treason, Kalen replied, his voice carrying absolute authority despite being wounded and dressed in clothes too small. Tell my treacherous brother that I'm alive, I'm free, and I'm coming for my throne. He has until the full moon to surrender voluntarily, or I take it by force and by right. Those are his only options. Bold words for Alpha in exile with only human mate as ally. Bold words from legitimate Alpha King addressing treasonous assassins. Leave his place. You can't cross the sanctum threshold without violating ancient law. And even Damien isn't stupid enough to risk that violation for the sake of eliminating a threat he doesn't believe I can actually carry out. The tracker studied us for a long moment, calculating odds and risks. Then he withdrew into the forest, communication device already in hand to report back to Damien. We're safe, Kalen said once the tracker disappeared. Temporarily, Damien will regroup, plan, approach this differently. But for now, we have time to recover, plan, and, he looked at me directly, and discuss the mate bond that you're still denying exists despite the fact that you just ran 4 hours at supernatural speed and crossed sanctum threshold that should have rejected human without a mate bond connection to ruling Alpha. I didn't run for 4 hours. You said 20 minutes. I said 20 minutes to keep you focused. We actually ran for 4 hours. You just didn't notice because the bond was suppressing your fatigue and enhancing your capabilities beyond normal human limits. That's not a minor manifestation, Nancy. That's significant bond strength that suggests we're genuinely compatible despite the circumstances of our meeting. I stared at him, processing that I'd just run for 4 hours without collapsing, that I'd crossed some magical threshold that should have rejected me, that apparently this mate bond thing was real and affecting me in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. Okay, I said finally, too exhausted to keep denying obvious evidence. Okay, mate bond is real. I'm apparently your fated mate despite being human civilian with no supernatural background. And we're trapped in ancient sanctuary while your homicidal brother plans how to kill us both. That's my life now. That's what I signed up for when I cut those chains. That's what you signed up for, Kalen agreed. Those signed up for implies choice. The mate bond isn't really about choice. It's about destiny, compatibility, the moon goddess's designation. You can reject it, refuse to complete it fully, Maintain distance despite the connection. But you can't unmake it. Once the bond recognizes two souls as compatible, that recognition is permanent regardless of circumstances. And if I want to reject it, if I'm not ready for any of this after 3 years of grief and isolation, then you reject it and we find different way to work together to defeat Damien and restore proper succession. The bond doesn't require a romantic relationship if you're not ready for that. It makes things easier if you accept it rather than fighting against connection that's trying to help you. Easier. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Humans make it complicated with their concerns about timing and readiness, and whether they deserve happiness after tragedy. The bond doesn't care about those concerns. It just cares about compatibility. Kaylin's expression softened slightly. But I understand if you need time. You've had more than enough thrown at you in the past 6 hours. We can discuss bond implications later. For now, rest. Recover. Let me tend my wounds properly now that we have time. And then we plan how to defeat my brother before he kills us both. That's a reasonable timeline. Rest, recover, plan, defeat homicidal alpha, then discuss supernatural relationship implications. That's a manageable order of operations. The sanctum interior was smaller than I'd expected. Single large room with stone altar in the center, symbols carved into every surface, and sense of power that made my teeth ache. Kaylin had immediately begun examining his wounds, using water from an ancient stone basin to clean the burns left by the gold chains. The gold was enchanted, he explained while working, specifically designed to poison alpha metabolism, prevent healing, and cause maximum suffering. Normal chains would have been broken easily. These chains required mate bond connection to sever because they were key to respond only to true mate's touch. Damien knew. He paused, his expression darkening. Damien knew I hadn't found my mate yet. That's why he chose this method. He thought the chains were unbreakable because he thought I'd die alone without anyone capable of freeing me. But I freed you because we're apparently fated mates, and the bond let me break what should have been unbreakable. I was sitting against the wall, watching him work, trying not to focus on the fact that he'd stripped off my husband's shirt to access the wounds properly. Does that mean you knew? When you saw me, that I was your mate? I suspected. The connection was intense. Immediate recognition despite my weakened state. But mate bonds don't always manifest clearly during crisis situations. Some alphas feel instant certainty. Others require time to understand what they're feeling. I'm in the latter category. I felt something, but I wasn't certain what until you successfully cut the chains and I was able to shift. Kaylin's amber eyes found mine across the space. Now I'm certain. You're my fated mate, Nancy Close. Whether you accept that designation or not, it's the reality we're both working with. And what does that mean practically? Beyond just explaining why I could cut the chains and why I ran 4 hours without collapsing. What does mate bond actually do? It creates connection between paired souls. Emotional awareness of each other's states, fear, pain, joy, determination. Physical enhancement of the human partner to allow them to match supernatural capabilities more closely. Intuitive understanding of each other's thoughts and intentions without requiring explicit communication. And Kaylin paused, clearly deciding how much to share. And it creates powerful magical resonance that amplifies both partners' capabilities when they work together rather than separately. So we're stronger together than apart. That's useful for fighting your brother. It's more than useful. It's the only advantage we have. Damien has armies, resources, established political power. We have mate bond and rightful claim to throne. In fair fight, Damien wins through superior numbers. In fight where mate bond is being used properly, we have chance. Then teach me. Whatever I need to know to use this bond properly. Teach me now, while we have time before your brother's next move. My decisiveness was back, overriding the fear and uncertainty. I didn't free you just to let you lose to treacherous brother, because I wasn't capable enough to help properly. Kalen's respect was obvious through his expression. Most humans struggle with accepting supernatural reality this quickly. You're adapting remarkably well for someone who thought she was living in a world without magic until 6 hours ago. I spent 3 years numbing myself to everything. Turns out that makes accepting supernatural reality easier, because I'm already practiced at accepting terrible circumstances I can't control. This is just different category of terrible circumstances that I actually can do something about. I stood, moving closer to where he sat by the altar. So teach me, what's first lesson in using mate bond for combat? First lesson is learning to sense me properly. Not just emotional awareness, but actual physical location, condition, intentions. The bond creates thread connecting us. You need to learn to follow that thread consciously rather than just feeling it subconsciously. How do I do that? Close your eyes. Focus inward. You'll feel the bond as warmth in your chest. Connection that's distinct from your own thoughts and feelings. That's me. My presence filtered through the mate bond. Follow that warmth. Let it expand. See where it leads. I close my eyes, following his instructions. And there, exactly as he described, was warmth that wasn't mine. Foreign presence that felt intimate despite being separate. Connection that let me sense not just Kalen's location, but his state. Wounded, determined, cautiously hopeful that I'd be capable of learning fast enough to be useful. I can feel you, I said, eyes still closed. Your pain from the wounds, your concern about whether we can actually defeat Damien, I paused, uncertain if I should mention what else I felt. Your attraction. To me, that's part of what I'm sensing too. Mate bond doesn't hide attraction. One of its features is absolute honesty between partners. You can't fake feelings or hide intentions because the other person feels them directly. That makes lying impossible, but also makes emotional intimacy unavoidable. Kalen's voice carried something that might have been embarrassing if alpha kings allowed themselves to be embarrassed. Yes, I'm attracted to you. You're my fated mate. You saved my life despite having no obligation to do so, and you're remarkably brave about circumstances that would terrify most humans. That's attractive combination regardless of species or situation. I'm attracted to you too, I admitted, because apparently mate bond honesty was contagious. Which is confusing because I'm still grieving my husband, and I thought I'd never feel attraction again after losing him. But the bond it's making me feel things I wasn't ready to feel. That's overwhelming. The bond accelerates emotional development between mates. That's necessary for building functional partnership quickly when circumstances require it. But it's also overwhelming when you're not prepared for the intensity. Kalen stood, moving closer. We can acknowledge the attraction without acting on it immediately. The bond doesn't require a romantic relationship to function effectively. It just works better when both partners are emotionally aligned rather than fighting against the connection. I'm not ready for a romantic relationship, but I'm also not ready to pretend this connection doesn't exist. Can we just exist in the middle? Acknowledging the bond, using it practically, but not rushing into anything I'm not ready for. We can absolutely exist in the middle. That's a mature approach that respects both our situations. Kalen's hand found mine carefully. Now, second lesson. Physical connection enhances bond strength. Not sexual contact, necessarily, though that's most powerful enhancement. Just touch, holding hands, proximity, physical awareness of each other. Try extending your perception through the bond now while we're in contact. I focused again, and the difference was dramatic. What had been vague warmth became crystal clear awareness of exactly where Kalen was, how badly he was injured, what he was thinking about, me, our chances of survival, whether he should tell me something he was clearly holding back. That's much clearer. I can almost read your thoughts. I opened my eyes, finding him closer than I'd expected. What are you not telling me? I can feel you holding something back. Perceptive. The bond makes hiding things difficult. Kalen's expression was serious. I'm holding back that the mate bond is going to paint an even larger target on you than just being my rescuer already did. Damien will recognize what you are to me the moment he sees us together, and that makes you both a valuable hostage and primary target. If he kills you, it damages me severely through bond backlash. If he captures you, he can use you to force my cooperation. You being my mate makes you simultaneously my greatest strength and my greatest vulnerability. So freeing you didn't just make me witness to his crimes. It made me a strategic asset in supernatural civil war I didn't know existed until today. I should have been terrified. Instead, I was just resigned. Of course it did, because my life couldn't just involve rescuing Cursed Wolf and moving on. It had to involve becoming a supernatural political pawn in alpha succession dispute. That's exactly my luck. Your luck is that you're resourceful enough to survive becoming a pawn rather than just being eliminated as an inconvenient complication. That's better luck than most humans in similar situations experience. Kalen's attempt at reassurance was practical rather than comforting. But yes, you're a strategic asset now, and we need to make sure you're capable enough to defend yourself when Damien inevitably comes for you. Then we skip the advanced lessons. I don't have time to learn supernatural combat theory slowly and carefully. I need practical capability I can use when assassins show up. What's the fastest way to make me dangerous rather than just vulnerable? The fastest way is completing the mate bond fully. Not just accepting its existence, but embracing it completely, which creates magical resonance that gives you access to some of my strength and capabilities. That requires, Kalen's discomfort was obvious. That requires intimate contact that you've already said you're not ready for. So fastest way isn't actually a viable option given your emotional state. What's second fastest way? Second fastest is teaching you to channel bond energy into supernatural attacks rather than just enhanced awareness. The bond is power source. You just need to learn to direct that power outward instead of just sensing it internally. That requires practice, focus, and acceptance that you're capable of violence when necessary. Are you capable of violence when necessary, Nancy? I thought about 3 years of grief that I'd managed through isolation rather than action, about finding Kalen dying and choosing to help despite risks, about running from trained assassins and making it to safety through determination more than skill. I'm capable of violence when the alternative is letting people I care about die. I won't enjoy it, but I'll do it if that's what's required to survive and to help you reclaim what was stolen. My certainty surprised me. Teach me to channel bond energy into attacks. I'll figure out the moral complications later, after we're not actively being hunted. That's practical priority assessment. I approve. Kalen moved to the altar, gesturing for me to join him. Place your hands here on the altar's surface. The sanctum amplifies magical resonance. It'll make learning to channel bond energy easier than trying to do it without external support. I placed my hands on the cold stone, feeling immediate surge of energy that made every nerve ending activate simultaneously. That's intense. What am I feeling? Ancient power that's been building in this place for centuries. It responds to rightful Alpha King and to his acknowledged mate. You're feeling the sanctum recognizing you as legitimate, which means Kalen's surprise was obvious, which means the bond is stronger than I anticipated. The sanctum doesn't recognize mates unless bond is significantly developed beyond initial formation. You've accelerated bond development through sheer force of acceptance and necessity. Is that good or bad? It's useful. Means you'll develop combat capability faster than normal timeline would allow. But it also means bond is deeper than either of us were prepared for given we met 6 hours ago. Kalen placed his hands over mine on the altar. Focus on the energy you're feeling, not just sensing it, but directing it. Imagine pushing it outward, away from yourself, creating barrier or attack using bond power as fuel. The visualization helps direct the actual magic. I focused, imagining the energy forming into a barrier like I'd seen in fantasy movies. Invisible wall that would stop attacks, protect me, keep threats away. And impossibly, I felt the energy respond, shaping itself according to my visualization, creating actual magical barrier that I could sense despite not being able to see directly. Excellent, Kalen said with genuine approval. Natural talent from magical manipulation. Most humans require weeks of practice to create even basic barriers. You've done it in single attempt. The bond is amplifying your capabilities significantly. More than normal mate bond manifestation should accomplish this quickly. Why is my bond amplification stronger than normal? I don't know. Mate bonds vary in strength based on compatibility, necessity, and sometimes just random chance. Yours is unusual, powerful in ways that suggest either exceptional compatibility or external magical influence we don't understand yet. Either way, its advantage we'll use against Damien. We practiced for hours, me learning to form barriers, to channel energy into basic attacks, to sense threats through bond awareness before they became immediate dangers. It was exhausting mentally more than physically, requiring concentration I'd never had to maintain for extended periods. That's enough for today, Kalen said finally, his own exhaustion obvious through the bond. You're developing faster than anticipated, but you still need rest. The bond enhancement only goes so far before you're just running on adrenaline and determination. That's not sustainable. How long before Damien's next move? How much time do we have to prepare? Days at most. Probably less. He'll be calculating risks, gathering forces, planning an approach that neutralizes sanctum protection. We use that time to rest, plan, and develop your capabilities enough that you're an asset rather than just a liability when fighting starts. I'm tired of being liability. I want to be asset. I sat down against the wall, my exhaustion catching up now that we'd stopped active training. I want to help you reclaim your throne, defeat your brother, restore proper succession. Not just because of mate bond obligation, but because betraying family that way is wrong, and someone needs to fix it. Moral outrage is useful motivation. Better than just following mate bond programming without conscious choice. Kalen joined me against the wall, close enough I could feel his warmth. You're remarkable, Nancy Close. Most humans in your situation will be paralyzed by fear or denial. You're processing everything and adapting anyway. That's exactly what good queen would do, if you choose to accept that role eventually. Let's survive the supernatural civil war first. Then we'll discuss whether I'm queen material or just a human who made a terrible decision to free a cursed wolf and got dragged into politics beyond her understanding. Fair timeline. Kalen's hand found mine. Rest. I'll keep watch. You're safe here. You need rest too. You're still wounded. Alpha healing is faster than human healing. I'll manage. Stubborn. Protective. There's a difference. I let myself lean against him, too exhausted to maintain distance despite my earlier reservations about rushing into emotional intimacy. The bond hummed with contentment at the proximity, and I felt myself starting to drift into sleep despite the circumstances. Nancy, Kalen said quietly, thank you for freeing me, for running with me, for accepting the bond despite having every reason to reject it. Thank you for being exactly what I needed when I needed it most. You're welcome, I murmured, already half asleep. Try not to get killed while I'm resting. Would hate to lose you right after finding you. I'll do my best. And that's how I fell asleep in ancient sanctum with wounded Alpha King keeping watch while assassins hunted us. Exhausted, terrified, but somehow more alive than I'd felt in 3 years of carefully managed isolation. Whatever came next, at least it wouldn't be numb grief. That was worth something, even if it got us both killed. Nancy just discovered she has supernatural powers through the mate bond. She's creating magical barriers. She's channeling energy attacks. And the sanctum recognizes her as Kalen's legitimate mate, which shouldn't be possible this fast. What happens when her bond develops faster than normal? Why is the sanctum's ancient power responding so strongly to her? And how is she going to use these new abilities when Damien's forces inevitably attack? Hit subscribe because the next chapter covers Damien's assault on the sanctum, Nancy's first real combat experience, and the revelation that she might not be entirely human after all. Also, sleeping next to wounded Alpha King in an ancient sanctuary. Romantic or just practical? Both. I woke to the sensation of wrongness filtering through the mate bond. Not pain or fear, but alertness that suggested Kalen had detected the threat before I'd consciously registered it. My eyes snapped open to find him standing by the sanctum entrance, his posture tense. "They're here," he said quietly. Damien didn't wait as long as I expected. He's brought significant force, 20 soldiers at minimum, possibly more concealed in the forest. And he's here personally, which means he's taking this seriously rather than just sending expendable trackers. Can they breach the sanctum? You said ancient law prevented entry without permission. I was on my feet now, adrenaline replacing exhaustion despite having slept only a few hours. Ancient law prevents forced entry, but there are loopholes. If Damien can prove I'm not legitimate Alpha King, if he can convince the sanctum's protective magic that his claim is stronger than mine, the barriers will fall. That's unlikely, but not impossible, given he's held the throne for 6 weeks and I've been presumed dead. Kalen turned to face me. We need to prepare for siege or for direct assault. Either way, the training you did yesterday becomes immediately relevant. Siege or assault. Those are both terrible options that end with us dead or captured. I moved to join him by the entrance, looking out at the clearing where I could now see figures emerging from the forest, soldiers in dark tactical gear, weapons that gleamed with silver coating that would be devastating to shapeshifters. And in the center, a man who could only be Damien, taller than Kalen, darker coloring, same amber eyes, but with cruelty in them that Kalen's lacked. "Kalen," Damien's voice carried across the clearing with practiced authority. "I am disappointed. I thought the chains would hold longer than 6 weeks. I underestimated either your resilience or," his gaze found me, "or your mate's determination. That's her, isn't it? The human who freed you. Nancy Close, local widow who lives in isolation. My trackers did thorough background research while following your trail. She's nobody. Civilian with no combat training, no supernatural affiliations, no political value. Why would you risk sanctuary for someone so utterly ordinary?" "She's my mate," Kalen replied, his voice carrying equal authority despite his wounded state. "That makes her extraordinary regardless of background or training. And she has more courage than all your soldiers combined. She freed me when leaving me to die would have been safer choice. That's worth more than political value or combat experience." Romantic. Foolish, but romantic. Damien's expression shifted to calculation. "I'll offer you terms, brother. Surrender voluntarily. Acknowledge my claim to the throne as legitimate, and I'll let your mate live. She'll be exiled from the territory, but alive. That's mercy I'm not obligated to offer. Refuse, and I'll breach the sanctum, kill you both, and ensure history remembers you as Mad Alpha who died fighting imaginary injustice rather than accepting proper succession. Prope succession. You committed fratricide and treason. There's nothing proper about your claim to the throne." Kalen's anger was cold and controlled. "I'll offer you counterterms. Surrender to sanctum judgment. Confess your crimes before assembled pack, and I'll argue for exile rather than execution. That's more mercy than you deserve, but more than you'll get if you force this to combat resolution." Sanctum judgment. Damien laughed, the sound carrying no humor. "The sanctum is ancient relic that hasn't issued judgment in 3 generations. It's not going to suddenly activate because you're hiding inside, claiming legitimacy. You're delusional, Kalen. Broken by the chains, mentally compromised, not fit to rule even if you somehow survive to challenge me properly. Surrender now and at least your mate lives. That's the only offer you're getting. He's going to attack," I said quietly through the bond connection. "He's not actually offering terms. He's buying time to position his forces. I can feel his deception through something. It's like the bond is letting me sense lies. The bond allows truth detection between mates and extends that capability to detecting falsehood in others when you're focused. You're sensing correctly. Damien is positioning for assault while pretending to negotiate. Kalen's hand found mine briefly. When he attacks, stay behind me. Your barrier training was good, but not sufficient for actual combat against trained soldiers with silver weapons. I need you alive and uninjured. I need you alive and uninjured too. So maybe we fight together rather than you trying to shield me like helpless civilian. My determination was overriding fear. I have barriers, I have bond-enhanced speed, and I have very strong motivation not to let your brother kill either of us. Use me properly instead of just protecting me. Using you properly means keeping you alive long enough to be useful rather than getting you killed in first engagement, because I was too reckless with your safety. Despite his words, I felt his respect through the bond. But yes, we fight together. When the assault comes, form barriers to deflect projectiles. Use bond awareness to track enemies I'm not directly engaging. And for Moon Goddess's sake, don't try to fight anyone hand-to-hand. You're enhanced, but you're not invincible. Understood. Understood. Barriers e awareness no melee combat. That's manageable plan. Damien's next words prove Kalen's prediction correct. Since you're refusing reasonable terms, I'll exercise my right as current alpha to challenge Sanctum protection directly. If the ancient magic recognizes my claim as legitimate, the barriers fall and we settle this through combat. If not, he paused dramatically, then I suppose you've bought yourself another few hours of life, while I find alternative entry method. He approached the Sanctum threshold, close enough that I could see the confidence in his expression, the certainty that this would work. His hand touched the barrier, invisible wall that separated the clearing from the Sanctum interior. The barrier held, not just passively, but actively, pushing back against Damien's touch with force that sent him stumbling backward several steps. Interesting, Damien said, his confidence shaken slightly. The Sanctum still recognizes you as legitimate alpha despite my holding the throne for 6 weeks. That's unexpected. But barriers can be broken through sufficient force and proper magical application. Plan B, then. Full assault. Breach protocols. And someone bring me the gold chains. If we can't enter to kill him, we'll make him come out to save his mate. That's not good, I said, watching as soldiers pulled massive gold chains from one of their vehicles. Those are the same chains that nearly killed you. If they're using those as weapons, then we're in significantly more danger than basic combat situation. Gold chains that are magically enhanced can trap and kill supernatural beings quickly if properly applied. And they can harm humans through magical backlash if you're connected to supernatural target via a mate bond. Kalen's tactical assessment was grim. We need to prevent them from applying those chains to either of us. That becomes priority 1. Avoid capture. Avoid extended combat. Avoid any situation where they have opportunity to chain us like they chained me before. How do we avoid capture when we're trapped in Sanctum that they're actively besieging? We don't stay trapped. There's an ancient exit passage beneath the Sanctum that leads to deeper forest. It's dangerous. The old magic in that area is unstable, aggressive, not regulated by any current alpha authority. But it's a better option than letting Damien chain us and torture us slowly. Dangerous escape passage versus magical torture chains. You're right that it's better option, but that's damning with faint praise. I was already moving toward where Kalen indicated the exit was, altar in the center of the room that apparently concealed passage beneath. How do we open it? Combined alpha authority and mate bond recognition. I place my hand here. He indicated symbol on the altar's surface. And you place yours here. The Sanctum reads our bond connection and unseals the passage if it determines we're legitimate. That's uncertain. The passage hasn't been opened in generations. It might not recognize current bond signatures. Only one way to find out. Do it before they breach the front entrance. We placed our hands on the indicated symbols simultaneously, and I felt a surge of power similar to what I'd experienced during barrier training, but significantly more intense. The Sanctum was evaluating us, reading our bond connection, assessing our legitimacy, determining if we had right to access escape passage. Then the altar shifted, stone grinding against stone, revealing spiral staircase descending into darkness beneath. It recognized us, Kalen said with obvious relief. That's significant validation that the bond is legitimate and strong. The sanctum is extremely selective about who it grants passage access to. Great. We're legitimately bonded according to ancient magical sanctuary. We can celebrate that after we're not actively being murdered by your brother. I started down the stairs, using my phone's flashlight to illuminate the darkness. Where does this lead? To the deep Blackwood, oldest part of the forest where original pack magic originated before civilization and organization. It's wild there, unpredictable, dangerous even to experienced alphas. But it's also where we might find allies, old wolves who rejected Damien's rule, magical creatures that owe no allegiance to current pack leadership. Maybe even. His words were cut off by the explosion above. Damien's forces breaching the sanctum entrance with magical explosives rather than waiting for barrier to fail naturally. Move! Kalen pushed me forward as debris began falling down the staircase. They've committed forced entry despite the ancient law violation. That means Damien is desperate enough to risk whatever consequences come from desecrating sanctuary. We need to reach the deep Blackwood before they follow us down. We ran down the spiral staircase, the sounds of destruction following us, soldiers entering the sanctum, orders being shouted, the scrape of those gold chains being dragged across stone as they prepare to use them as weapons. The staircase seemed endless, descending far deeper than should have been possible beneath a small sanctuary structure. The walls were carved with symbols similar to those above, but older, more primitive, emanating power that made my skin crawl with its intensity. Almost there, Kalen said as we descended. Another 30 seconds, and we'll reach the passage proper. Then it's 2 miles of ancient tunnel before we emerge in deep Blackwood territory. We can make 2 miles before they organize proper pursuit. 2 miles while they're chasing us with gold chains and military weapons. That's optimistic timeline. That's necessary timeline. We don't have a choice of waiting for better circumstances. Behind us, I heard boots on stone, soldiers following down the staircase, moving with professional efficiency that suggested they were not going to be delayed by ancient magic or dangerous territory. They'd committed to pursuit, which meant Damien had given orders to capture or kill regardless of risk or cost. We reached the bottom of the staircase, emerging into tunnel that stretched forward into darkness. The walls here were natural stone rather than carved, the passage formed by old magic rather than construction, creating space that felt alive rather than just empty. This way, Kalen directed, taking my hand to guide me through the darkness that his alpha vision could navigate but that I struggled with even using my phone light. Stay close. The tunnel has variations. Passages that appear solid but aren't, areas where magic is concentrated enough to be actively hostile. I'll guide you through the safe route. We ran through the tunnel, me trusting Kalen's navigation while listening to pursuit growing louder behind us. The soldiers weren't slowed by darkness or dangerous magic. They had equipment, training, supernatural abilities that let them match our pace despite the difficult terrain. They're gaining. I gasped, my supernatural endurance starting to reach its limits. I can't maintain this pace while navigating blind. I'm going to trip or fall or... You're doing fine. Just keep moving. 2 miles, Nancy. You've already run 1 mile. You can run 1 more. Easy for you to say when you have night vision and supernatural stamina. And my words were cut off by impact, something hitting my legs, wrapping around them with metallic sound that I recognized with horror. Gold chains, thrown by one of the pursuing soldiers with accuracy that suggested extensive practice in capturing fleeing targets. I went down hard, the chains burning where they touched my skin despite me being human rather than supernatural. The mate bond was conducting the chains' magic, making them effective against me through my connection to Kalen. Nancy! Kalen's horror filtered through the bond as he turned back, seeing me on the ground with chains binding my legs. No, don't. More chains came out of the darkness. These aimed at him, multiple soldiers coordinating their throws to bind him the same way they'd bound him in the forest. But Kalen was faster now than he'd been when weakened and dying. He dodged, shifted partially to wolf form, used speed and strength that made the soldiers' accuracy irrelevant. But while he was fighting them off, they were closing distance with me. And one of them, tall woman with cold efficiency in her movements, was pulling out more chains specifically designed to bind mates together, to use bond connection as weakness rather than strength. "Kaelin, run!" I shouted through the pain of the burning chains. "Don't let them take you again. Run and come back with help. I'm not leaving you." His refusal was absolute. I won't abandon my mate to save myself. Then we both get captured and both die, and Damien wins. Be practical." Tears were streaming down my face from pain and frustration. Please run while you still can." But he didn't run. Of course he didn't run, because mate bonds made practical decisions like abandoning your partner to save yourself nearly impossible to execute, even when they were obviously correct choice. The soldiers surrounded us both, Kaelin bound in chains that forced him back to human form, me bound in chains that burned through mate bond connection, both of us helpless as Damien emerged from the darkness with expression of satisfaction. "That was easier than anticipated," Damien said, looking between us. "I expected more resistance from legendary Alpha King and his miracle mate. But bonds make you predictable. You wouldn't leave her, and she wouldn't let you sacrifice yourself. That's weakness I can exploit repeatedly." "You violated sanctum law," Kaelin said through the pain of the chains. "The pack will know. The territory will know. You've desecrated ancient place of sanctuary for personal gain. That's unforgivable offense that will turn even your loyalists against you. The pack will know I eliminated threat to kingdom stability, that I captured Mad Alpha, who is attempting to reclaim throne through violence rather than accepting proper succession. And they'll see that I treated him mercifully by offering quick death rather than extended imprisonment." Damien gestured, and soldiers began dragging us back through the tunnel toward the surface. "Your mate, though, she's interesting complication. Can't kill her without severely damaging you through bond backlash. Can't set her free without her becoming ongoing problem. So I'll hold her as incentive for your cooperation. You surrender publicly, acknowledge my rule as legitimate, and she lives out her life in comfortable imprisonment rather than being executed for aiding fugitive Alpha. I'll never acknowledge your rule as legitimate." Kaelin's defiance was absolute despite the chains and the pain and the hopelessness of our situation. "Kill me, torture me, do whatever you want. I won't betray my pack by pretending your treason was rightful succession. Then I'll torture her instead and let you feel it through bond connection until you change your mind about cooperation." Damien's cruelty was casual, matter of fact. That's beauty of mate bonds. I don't need to touch you to break you. I just need to hurt her badly enough that you'll do anything to make it stop. That's significantly more effective than direct torture. You're going to torture me to force him to cooperate." I was processing this with strange calm that suggested shock was setting in. That's your plan. That's the most efficient plan. Direct torture of alphas is difficult. They have high pain tolerance, supernatural healing, ability to endure suffering that would break normal beings. But torture through mate bond bypasses all those defenses. You'll break quickly, and once you've broken, he'll break rather than continue experiencing your suffering secondhand. It's elegant solution to stubborn prisoners. "You're insane," I said with absolute certainty. "Completely, dangerously insane if you think that plan won't backfire catastrophically when the pack learns you're torturing civilians to force Alpha cooperation. That's beyond just treasonous. That's monstrous. And you're naive if you think the pack cares about one human civilian suffering when kingdom stability is at stake. They'll accept necessary evil if it prevents civil war and restores order." Damien's confidence was unshakable. "Take them to the facility. Separate cells, but adjacent so they can sense each other through bond. Begin interrogation once I've addressed the pack about today's developments. I want Kaelin cooperative before we proceed with public execution." The soldiers dragged us through the tunnel, up the stairs, back to the surface where more vehicles waited. I tried to maintain bond with Kaelin, tried to communicate through the link despite the pain from the chains making concentration difficult. I'm sorry, I said through the bond. I'm sorry I wasn't fast enough, that they captured us because I couldn't run properly. This isn't your fault. Kalen's response was fierce despite his own pain. This is Damien's evil manifesting exactly as I feared. But Nancy, listen carefully. You have capabilities you haven't discovered yet. The Sanctum responded to you too strongly. The bond developed too quickly. The ancient magic recognized you too easily. You're not entirely human despite believing otherwise. When they interrogate you, when they try to hurt you, that hidden nature might wake up properly. Use it. Break free. Save yourself even if you can't save me. I'm not leaving you. You might not have choice. If your hidden nature activates, it will prioritize your survival over mine. Let it. Live, Nancy. Live and find help and come back with forces strong enough to actually defeat Damien instead of just opposing him futilely. That's order from your Alpha King. I don't take orders well. Even noticed. But take this one anyway. Survive. Whatever it takes. The connection cut off as they separated us. Loading Kalen into one vehicle, me into another, ensuring we couldn't coordinate or communicate effectively despite the mate bond's ability to transcend physical separation. I was alone, bound in gold chains that burned through a supernatural connection to Alpha I'd known for less than 24 hours, being taken to be tortured to force his cooperation with a brother who'd already tried to kill him once. This was significantly worse than dying of grief-induced isolation in cabin at the edge of cursed forest. But Kalen was right that I had capabilities I hadn't discovered. I'd felt them during barrier training, during my ability to run supernatural distances, during the Sanctum's eager recognition of me as legitimate despite being supposedly a human civilian. Something in me was more than human. Something that had been sleeping my entire life because I never needed it to activate. Now I needed it desperately. And I was going to find out exactly what I was capable of when pushed beyond normal human limits. Damien thought torturing me would break Kalen's resistance. He had no idea that torturing me might just wake up whatever supernatural nature I'd been carrying unknowingly for 32 years. That was going to be very bad for him, and very good for us. If I could figure out how to activate it before his interrogation broke me beyond recovery. No pressure. The facility they took me to was an underground complex that looked like it had been designed specifically for holding supernatural prisoners. Walls reinforced with silver alloy, cells with gold-enhanced bars, lighting that would disorient shapeshifter vision without affecting humans. Professional setup that suggested Damien had planned for holding captured alphas long before Kalen became his target. They locked me in cell adjacent to Kalen's, close enough I could hear him breathing through the wall, but not close enough to touch or communicate beyond bond connection. The gold chains remained on my wrists and ankles, burning steadily but not intensely enough to cause serious damage. Strategic discomfort designed to weaken without incapacitating. Nancy, Kalen's voice came through the wall. Are you hurt beyond the chains? Bruised from falling when they threw the chains at me. Otherwise intact. You. Same. They're being careful not to damage us too severely before interrogation. That's actually a bad sign. Means they're confident in their ability to extract cooperation through psychological methods, rather than needing physical torture immediately. His frustration filtered through the bond. I am sorry. I should have run when you told me to. Should have prioritized escape over rescue attempt. Now we're both captured and Damien has exactly what he needs to force my cooperation. Stop apologizing for not abandoning me. That's what the mate bond is supposed to prevent, right? Leaving your partner in danger to save yourself. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, even if it ended badly. I leaned against the cold cell wall, trying to find comfortable position despite the chains. What you said in the vehicle about me not being entirely human. What did you mean? I meant that your capabilities are beyond what human civilian should possess even with mate bond enhancement. The Sanctum recognition, the rapid bond development, the natural magical manipulation, the ease with which ancient magic responds to you. That's not normal human response to supernatural circumstances. That's dormant supernatural nature beginning to manifest under extreme stress. You think I'm what? Part werewolf? Some kind of hybrid? How would I not know that for 32 years? Dormant supernatural heritage can remain completely hidden if carrier never enters supernatural territory or encounters circumstances that trigger activation. You lived in normal human city, had a normal human marriage, and worked normal human job. Nothing in that life would have triggered supernatural awareness. But entering the Blackwood, freeing chained alpha, forming mate bond, those are all strong triggers for dormant nature to begin waking. And yours is waking rapidly, which suggests it's powerful when fully activated. So I might be supernatural and just never knew it. That's actually better news than being an ordinary human about to be tortured. At least supernatural something has a chance of defending itself. I tried to access whatever dormant nature Kaelin was claiming existed, reaching inward the same way I'd reached for bond connection. But there was nothing, no hidden reserve of power, no sleeping supernatural essence, just my normal human consciousness and the bond connection to Kaelin that was currently my only supernatural ability. You won't activate it consciously. Dormant nature protects itself by remaining hidden until threat is severe enough to require intervention. Trying to force activation just reinforces the dormancy, because you're not actually in immediate danger yet. When Damien's interrogators begin, when a threat becomes real, that's when your nature will decide whether to activate or remain hidden. So my survival depends on some sleeping supernatural something deciding I'm threatened enough to bother waking up. That's not exactly reliable survival strategy. It's the only strategy we have beyond hoping that rescue arrives before interrogation breaks both of us. Kaelin's grim assessment was honest. I've sent signal through pack bonds to wolves I trust, old allies who didn't accept Damien's succession as legitimate. They might be organizing rescue attempt, but that takes time, and we might not have time before Damien forces my cooperation through torturing you. Then we need to buy time. How do I do that? How do I resist interrogation without supernatural abilities? You don't resist. You give them useless information. You pretend to break without actually providing anything actionable. You be human civilian who's terrified and cooperative, but ultimately doesn't know anything strategic. That's your cover. You're just woman who accidentally freed me, who got caught up in supernatural politics, who's not valuable except as leverage against me. If they believe that they might not escalate torture beyond basic intimidation, what happens if they don't believe that? If they figure out I'm more than just random human? Then interrogation becomes significantly more aggressive because they'll want to know what you are, what capabilities you have, whether you're threat beyond just being my mate. That's that scenario we want to avoid if possible. Footsteps in the corridor interrupted our conversation. Multiple people approaching with purposeful stride that suggested interrogation was about to begin. I felt Kaelin's tension through the bond, his alpha instincts screaming at him to protect me while being completely unable to act on those instincts. Stay strong, he said through the bond connection. Whatever they do, I'm with you. You're not alone in this. I know. I can feel you. That's actually helping. The cell door opened, revealing two interrogators, man and woman, both wearing expressions of professional detachment that suggested they'd done this many times before. The woman carried a medical kit that I really didn't want to think about the contents of. Nancy Close, the man said, consulting a tablet that apparently held information about me. Age 32, widow of 3 years, lives in isolation at the edge of Blackwood Forest. No supernatural afiliações, no PEC conexões, no documented magical abilities. You're a remarkably ordinary person who made extraordinarily poor decision to free the wrong alpha. Do you understand the severity of your situation? I understand I'm being held prisoner by Alpha, who committed treason and is now torturing civilians to force cooperation. That seems like it speaks more to your situation's severity than mine. My defiance surprised me. Apparently facing actual danger made me braver than I'd expected. Defiance is common initial response. It fades quickly once reality of interrogation becomes clear. The woman was unpacking the medical kit, laying out instruments that looked exactly as terrible as I'd feared. We're going to ask questions. You're going to answer honestly. For each lie or refusal, we apply pain. Simple process that has high success rate across all species and capabilities. Ready to begin? What if I don't know the answers to your questions? Kind of hard to answer honestly when I don't actually have information you're seeking. Then we'll verify your ignorance through extended questioning. If you truly don't know, the interrogation concludes relatively quickly. If you're lying about ignorance, it continues until we're satisfied we've extracted all available information. Either way, the process begins now. The first question was simple. How did you know where to find Kaylin? I didn't know. I was hiking in a blackwood, heard sounds of suffering, investigated like idiot who doesn't watch enough horror movies to know investigating strange sounds in cursed forest is terrible idea. Found white wolf bound in gold chains. Freed him because I couldn't watch him die slowly when I had tools to help. That's entire story, coincidence and stupidity, not planning or conspiracy. Why would you risk freeing a dangerous predator? Because I've spent 3 years watching myself die, slowly from grief, and I was tired of watching things suffer without helping. That's a psychological issue, not a supernatural conspiracy. My dead husband would probably point out that I've always been terrible at self-preservation when faced with suffering I can prevent. The interrogators exchanged looks, apparently not expecting psychiatric honesty quite this early in questioning. How much has Kaylin told you about his plans to reclaim the throne? He told me his brother chained him in gold to kill him slowly, that said brother committed treason to steal throne, and that he plans to defeat brother through unspecified means because Alpha Kings don't share detailed tactical plans with human civilians they've known for 24 hours. That's extent of my strategic knowledge, very general grievances, and very vague revenge plans. What supernatural abilities have you developed through the mate bond? Barriers, enhanced endurance, ability to sense lies through bond connection to Kaylin. That's it. I'm brand new to having any abilities. I was ordinary human until yesterday afternoon when I accidentally freed cursed Alpha and discovered supernatural world exists. I'm not experienced combatant or trained operative. I'm traumatized widow who made terrible decision and is now paying consequences. More exchanged looks. My complete honesty was apparently disarming. They'd expected denials, resistance, need for escalation. Instead, I was just telling them exactly what they wanted to know because I genuinely didn't have strategic information worth protecting. Are you aware of any allies Kaylin has contacted for rescue purposes? He mentioned sending signals through pack bonds to wolves he trusts. Didn't specify who, didn't say when they might arrive, didn't share actual rescue plans because, again, brand new mate who doesn't need strategic details. I'm liability he's trying to protect, not asset he's incorporating into tactical planning. The woman who'd been preparing instruments put them away, apparently deciding physical torture wasn't necessary for civilian who was cooperating fully without resistance. Your honesty is noted, the man said. We'll verify your statements through additional questioning of Kaylin. If discrepancies emerge between your accounts, we'll reconvene with stronger encouragement for accuracy. But for now, you're cooperating adequately for continued nonviolent interrogation. They left, locking the cell behind them, and I collapsed against the wall with relief and terror warring for dominance in my emotional state. That was perfect, Kaylin said through the wall and through the bond simultaneously. Exactly the right balance of honesty and strategic omission. You gave them nothing actionable while seeming completely forthcoming. That's interrogation resistance I wouldn't have expected from civilian with no training. I wasn't resisting. I was just being honest about not having useful information because I genuinely don't have useful information. Turns out being ignorant is effective defense against interrogation focused on extracting intelligence. I was shaking now that adrenaline was fading. They'll question you next. What I need to know before they do. You need to know that I'm going to validate everything you said and add that you're innocent civilian caught up in circumstances beyond your control. The goal is making you valueless except as leverage. If they believe you're not tactical asset, they might not escalate torture beyond intimidation. That keeps you alive and functional for when rescue arrives or when your dormant nature finally activates. You're very optimistic about both rescue and nature activation. I'm realistic about them being our only options beyond hoping Damien has sudden change of heart about fratricide. That's not likely outcome, so I'm focusing on possible alternatives. Hours passed, me in my cell, Kalen in his, both of us listening to interrogators moving through facility conducting their systematic questioning. I heard Kalen being questioned, heard his responses validating my statements, heard the interrogator's frustration that neither of us seemed to be hiding significant strategic information. Then I heard something else, shouting in the corridors above, sounds of combat, the distinctive crack of bone and silver weapons impacting supernatural flesh. Someone was fighting their way into the facility. Rescue? I asked through the bond, hope warring with fear that this might be different threat rather than salvation. Maybe. Or Damien's loyalists responding to perceived threat. Either way, be ready. If cell doors open, run. Don't wait for me. Don't try to help me. Just run for surface and find whoever's attacking this facility. If it's rescue, they'll protect you. If it's not, at least you'll die in combat rather than in torture chamber. I'm not leaving you again. We've established I'm terrible at practical self-preservation decisions when my mate is in danger. Nancy, no, stop telling me to abandon you. That's not happening regardless of tactical considerations. We escape together or we stay captured together. Those are only options I'm accepting. The sounds of combat were getting closer. Whoever was attacking was winning, pushing deeper into the facility despite resistance from guards. I heard someone shouting orders in voice I didn't recognize, heard explosions that suggested liberal use of magical warfare against reinforced walls. Then my cell door exploded inward. Not opened, not unlocked, but destroyed through concentrated magical blast that left twisted metal and rubble where gold-enhanced bars had been. Nancy close. The woman standing in the doorway was tall, muscular, with silver-streaked hair and amber eyes that marked her as supernatural. I'm Vera, Kalen's second. We're executing rescue operation. Can you walk? I can run if it means getting out of here. Kalen's in the adjacent cell. We need to free him before we leave. Already being handled. My team is breaking him out simultaneously. You're coming with me to surface while they extract him. That's protocol. Separate exfiltration paths reduce risk of recapture. I'm not leaving without confirming he's. Nancy, Kalen's voice through the bond was firm. Go with Vera. I'll meet you at surface once my team extracts me. That's order from Alpha King and from mate who wants you safe more than he wants us together during evacuation. Go. I went, following Vera through corridors filled with unconscious guards and damaged walls, moving towards surface with speed that suggested extensive planning had gone into this rescue operation. How did you find us so quickly? I asked while running. Kalen's packed bond signal led us to general facility location. Then we used magical tracking to pinpoint exact cells. That took 12 hours, longer than we wanted but faster than Damien anticipated. His interrogators barely started questioning before we breached. Vera was guiding me upstairs, through security checkpoints that had been literally torn apart by rescue team's assault. We're getting you both to safe location where Kalen can recover properly and where we can begin organizing proper challenge against Damien's illegitimate rule. We emerged into night air, cold, clean, free of the underground facility's oppressive atmosphere. Other wolves were appearing from different exit points, including team escorting Kalen, who looked worse for wear, but alive and mobile. Nancy, he moved to me immediately, pulling me close despite Vera's protest about maintaining tactical formation during evacuation. You're safe. You made out. We both made it out. That's better outcome than I was expecting after being interrogated. I leaned against him, feeling the mate bond settle now that we were reunited and relatively safe. Now what? Where do we go that Damien can't follow? Now, Vera said with grim satisfaction, we go to the Northern Assembly grounds where pack can be gathered for proper challenge. Damien's held the throne through deception and force. Kalen challenges him through rightful claim and trial by combat. That's how legitimate succession is restored. Not through hiding and rescue operations, but through formal challenge that establishes authority permanently. Trial by combat. You mean Kaelin fights Damien directly for the throne? The implications were obvious and terrifying. That's Kaelin's still wounded from the chains. He's been imprisoned and interrogated. He's not at full strength. How is that fair fight? It's not fair fight, but it's a legitimate challenge that forces public resolution of succession dispute. Once a challenge is issued formally, Damien can't refuse without losing face and authority. He'll fight, and when he loses, his claim to the throne dies with him. Vera's confidence was absolute. Kaelin is still Alpha King despite wounds and imprisonment. In direct combat with proper pack witnesses, he'll defeat Damien regardless of current physical state. That's what it means to be rightful Alpha. The throne recognizes true ruler even when circumstances are unfavorable. You're very confident about the outcome of fight between the wounded Alpha and the brother who's been holding power for 6 weeks. I'm confident in Kaelin's ability to win when everything he cares about depends on victory. That's better motivation than Damien's desperation to maintain stolen authority. Vera looked at me directly. And you're part of that motivation now. As his mate, you'll be present during challenge. Watching. Your safety depends on his victory. That's powerful incentive beyond just reclaiming throne. He's fighting for mate as well as kingdom. That makes him significantly more dangerous than wounded Alpha in isolation would be. So I'm going to watch him fight his brother to the death while being unable to help. The horror of that was setting in now that immediate danger had passed. I can't. You can and you will, Kaelin said gently. Because being present is part of the challenge protocol. My mate witnesses my combat capability, confirms my fitness to rule, validates succession when I win. That's not just tradition, it's a magical requirement. The throne needs to recognize both Alpha and mate as legitimate before power transfer completes properly. You're not just watching. You're participating in ritual that restores proper order. I hate that this all makes sense according to supernatural rules I'm just learning about. But I was accepting it, because what choice did I have? Running away wouldn't help Kaelin. Hiding wouldn't change the necessity of challenge. Refusing to participate wouldn't make situation better. When is this challenge happening? 2 days from now at the full moon. That gives Kaelin time to heal from chains and interrogation, gives us time to gather pack witnesses, and gives Damien time to realize his theft of the throne is ending regardless of his preferences. Vera was already moving, leading our group toward vehicles that would transport us to wherever this safe location was. Now come on, we need to get Kaelin proper medical treatment and you proper rest before the Werewolf fight begins. As we drove away from the facility, I felt my dormant supernatural nature stir again. Not activating, not emerging, just acknowledging that it existed, that it was waiting, that when circumstances required it would manifest properly. Whatever I was beneath the human civilian surface, it was something that recognized the importance of what was coming. It was something that intended to participate regardless of my conscious awareness or control. And that was terrifying and exciting simultaneously. Because if my dormant nature was preparing to activate, that meant it expected circumstances dangerous enough to require its intervention. That meant the challenge combat was going to be significantly worse than everyone was admitting. And I was going to be right there watching, helpless to intervene, forced to witness the man I'd accidentally bonded with fighting for both our lives against brother who'd already tried to kill him once. No pressure, just the fate of a kingdom, the restoration of proper succession, and my personal survival, all depending on wounded Alpha winning combat against opponent who'd spent 6 weeks consolidating power. Easy, totally manageable. I was definitely not going to panic about any of this. Definitely not. The safe location turned out to be ancient pack grounds deep in territory that remained loyal to Kaelin despite Damien's 6-week rule. Wolves who'd never believed the official story about Kaelin's death, who'd been waiting for him to return, who welcomed his resurrection with fierce loyalty that made me understand exactly why Damien had been desperate to ensure he stayed dead. These wolves are my core, Kalen explained while healers worked on removing the remaining gold chain damage from his body. The ones who've served my family for generations, who owe allegiance to throne itself rather than to whoever currently occupies it. Damien has majority of pack through intimidation and careful manipulation. But core loyalty remains with legitimate succession. That's why he can't refuse challenge. If he does, these wolves will revolt, and he'll lose throne anyway through civil war rather than through controlled combat. So the challenge is his only option for maintaining any authority at all. I was sitting beside him, close enough to provide mate bond support, but far enough to let healers work without interference. He's going to fight you with everything he has because losing means losing everything. Exactly. Which makes him a dangerous opponent despite my rightful claim to throne. Desperate alphas are unpredictable, willing to use tactics that violate combat protocol, more likely to attempt lethal strikes rather than just dominance establishment. Kalen winced as healer pressed a particularly deep wound. I need to heal as much as possible in 2 days, which means aggressive treatment that's uncomfortable but necessary. Stop talking like I'm fragile observer who can't handle watching you in pain. I freed you from gold chains while you were dying. I watched you shift for the first time. I ran from assassins and was interrogated by your brother's thugs. I'm not going to faint because healers are being thorough with wound treatment. My irritation was covering fear. Fear that 2 days wouldn't be enough, that Kalen would fight wounded, that Damien would exploit those wounds to win combat that should have been a straightforward dominance challenge. You're remarkably composed for someone who's been thrown into a supernatural political crisis without warning or training. Vera had joined us, watching the healing process with tactical assessment that suggested she was calculating exactly how combat-ready Kalen would be by full moon. Most humans in your position would be completely overwhelmed, demanding to go home, refusing to participate in anything beyond their normal experience. You're adapted. That's unusual. Suggests either exceptional mental resilience or dormant supernatural nature beginning to influence your responses. Kalen thinks I'm not entirely human, that I have some sleeping supernatural something that's waking up because of stress and mate bond and general immersion in magical circumstances. I tried to sound skeptical, but knew I was failing. Too many strange things had happened for me to maintain genuine doubt about having hidden nature. Is there a way to test that? To confirm whether I'm dormant supernatural or just remarkably adaptable human? They're tests, but they're irrelevant until after challenge. Whatever you are, you'll be properly assessed once succession is secured and Kalen is back on throne officially. For now, you're his mate, his anchor, his motivation to win against impossible odds. That's all you need to be. Vera's practicality was grounding. Focus on supporting him through next 2 days. Let healers do their work. And prepare yourself mentally for watching combat that will be brutal. Alpha challenges for kingship aren't sporting matches. They're fights to death or permanent submission. You need to be ready to witness that level of violence against mate you've bonded with. I'm not ready. I don't think anyone is ready to watch their partner fight to death. But I'll do it anyway because that's what being mate apparently means, supporting them through terrible circumstances regardless of readiness. I met her eyes directly. Is there anything I can do? Any way I can actually help rather than just watching? You help by being present, by providing mate bond strength through proximity. By witnessing a challenge, the throne recognizes both alpha and mate as legitimate. That's not passive role despite feeling like it. You're literally part of ritual that transfers power properly. Without mate present, challenge doesn't have full authority. Vera's expression softened slightly. And if your dormant nature activates during combat, if you manifest whatever abilities you've been carrying unknowingly, that might shift dynamics in ways none of us can predict. Damien will be prepared for fighting wounded Kalen. He won't be prepared for suddenly active supernatural mate intervening in ways challenge protocol doesn't usually account for. You want my dormant nature to activate during the fight. You're hoping it will. I'm hoping for any advantage that increases Kalen's chances of victory and survival. If that advantage is you manifesting hidden power at critical moment. Yes, I'm hoping for that. Not because it's traditional or proper, but because we're fighting against Alpha, who's already violated every rule to steal throne. Fighting back using unconventional advantages is justified response to his treachery. That's very pragmatic perspective on challenge protocol. That's very desperate perspective from Second, who watched legitimate Alpha get chained and left to die, who couldn't prevent it, who's now hoping the rescue operation doesn't end with watching him die in combat because healing didn't progress fast enough. Vera's frustration was obvious. I'm not interested in proper protocol. I'm interested in Kalen surviving and Damien losing. Whatever accomplishes, that is an acceptable strategy in my assessment. The 2 days passed in strange combination of too slow and too fast, hours dragging while watching healers work on Kalen's injuries. But moments flying past when I realized how little time remained before he'd be fighting for both our lives. He was healing well. Alpha regeneration was impressive even after extensive damage, but he wasn't at full strength. Not nearly. He'd be fighting wounded, tired, still recovering from chains that had nearly killed him. Stop worrying, he said the night before the challenge, sensing my anxiety through the bond. I'm stronger than I look, and more motivated than Damien anticipates. I'm not losing, mate. I just found a brother who's already betrayed me once. That's powerful motivation beyond just political necessity. I'm worried because worrying seems like appropriate response to watching you fight to death tomorrow. We were in private quarters the pack had provided. Actual bedroom with actual bed rather than underground prison cell or ancient sanctum floor. Normal circumstances that made supernatural situation feel surreal. What happens if you lose? What happens to me if Damien wins? If I lose, Vera will extract you immediately and get you to safe territory outside Damien's jurisdiction. You'll be protected, relocated, given new identity if necessary. The pack will ensure Damien can't use you for political leverage or revenge purposes. You'll be safe even if I'm not. Kalen's honesty was painful to hear, but I'm not planning to lose. I'm planning to win, reclaim throne, and spend rest of our lives making sure you never regret freeing me from those chains in the forest. I already don't regret it. Regardless of outcome tomorrow, I don't regret helping you. That was right choice even if circumstances that followed have been terrifying and complicated. I moved closer, needing the physical contact that amplified mate-bond connection. I should tell you, I'm not good at processing death. My husband's accident destroyed me for 3 years. If you die tomorrow, I don't know if I recover from that. The mate bond makes this deeper than my marriage was. Losing you would break something fundamental that grief can't heal. I know, bond death is catastrophic for surviving partner. But Nancy, he pulled me against him carefully, mindful of healing wounds. I'm not dying tomorrow. I'm winning, surviving, and building a future with mate who's braver than she realizes and more capable than she believes. That's not false confidence. That's certain that the throne recognizes the true king and will support my claim through whatever advantage it can provide during combat. The throne is a magical entity that actively supports legitimate rulers. The throne is ancient power that's been held by my bloodline for 12 generations. It recognizes rightful succession and rejects usurpers through subtle means. Damien has held it for 6 weeks, but it's never accepted him fully. That's why his rule has been unstable, why he's needed intimidation and force to maintain authority, why challenge is necessary rather than his position being unquestionable. When we fight tomorrow, throne will support me and resist him. That's advantage beyond just physical capability or tactical skill. That's much better news than I was expecting. Magical throne support seems like significant advantage. It is, though it won't make combat easy or guaranteed. Damien is strong, experienced, fighting for survival, just like I am. But combined with mate bond strength, with pack witnesses who want legitimate succession, with Throne's subtle support, I have enough advantages to win despite wounds and recent imprisonment. His certainty filtered through the bond, and I felt myself believing him despite rational fear. Sleep, rest. Save your strength for tomorrow when being present requires more from you than just observation. When your dormant nature might finally decide circumstances are threatening enough to warrant activation. You're very confident my dormant nature is real and going to manifest helpfully rather than catastrophically. I'm confident you're more than you believe yourself to be. Whatever manifests tomorrow will be impressive. I'm certain of that, even if details remain unknown. I tried to sleep, tried to rest like he'd instructed. But anxiety kept me awake, running through scenarios of how combat might develop, calculating odds of various outcomes, trying to prepare myself mentally for watching violence that would determine whether I spent the rest of my life with Kalen or watching him die after knowing him for less than a week. The dawn came too quickly, pale light filtering through windows that announced the full moon day was beginning. That challenge would occur at moonrise according to tradition, that I had approximately 12 hours before everything either resolved or collapsed catastrophically. Ready? Kalen asked, already dressed in ceremonial combat gear that marked him as Alpha King challenging for rightful throne. I'm not ready, but I'm doing this anyway because being ready isn't a requirement for participation. I was dressed in formal clothing that Vera had provided, deep blue dress that marked me as Alpha's mate without being impractically elaborate. Let's go restore proper succession and hope my dormant nature decides to be helpful rather than staying sleeping through entire crisis. That's the attitude. Terrified determination is an acceptable approach to witnessing Alpha King combat challenge. You're very reassuring. I'm very honest. Reassurance is luxury we still don't have time for. The Northern Assembly grounds were exactly as imposing as I'd imagined. Ancient stone circle where pack challenges have been conducted for generations, symbols carved in a rock that predated modern language, sense of power that made the sanctum feel minor by comparison. Hundreds of wolves were gathered, representing both Damien's loyalists and Kalen's core supporters, all here to witness challenge that would determine Kingdom's future. Damien was already present, standing in the center of the circle, dressed in similar ceremonial combat gear, looking confident and dangerous and not at all concerned about fighting wounded brother. He saw me enter with Kalen and smiled with cruel satisfaction. So the mates survived interrogation. I'm almost disappointed. I was hoping to start combat already mourning her loss through bond backlash. That would have made victory even simpler. His voice carried across the gathered crowd. But watching her witness your defeat will be satisfying alternative. Seeing you fail to protect mate you've bonded with. Watching her realize she chose wrong Alpha to free from chains. That's adequate compensation for missing opportunity to torture her properly. Keep talking, Kalen replied calmly. Every word proves you're not fit to rule. Real kings don't threaten mates, don't torture civilians, don't steal thrones through fratricide. You're a usurper who's about to learn that stolen authority is no match for legitimate succession supported by rightful claim and mate bond strength. We'll see about that. Challenge begins at moonrise. I suggest you spend the remaining time making peace with your mate, explaining that you tried your best but weren't strong enough to protect her from consequences of choosing you. That's kinder than letting her discover your inadequacy through watching you lose combat you should have avoided by accepting my rule as legitimate. Vera led me to a designated position for mate witness. Raised platform where I could see entire combat circle clearly, where Pat could see me supporting Kalen through challenges, where throne magic could read my presence and recognize bond legitimacy. Remember, Vera said quietly, your role is to witness and to provide bond strength through proximity. Don't try to intervene directly. That violates challenge protocol and results in automatic forfeit. But if your dormant nature activates, if you manifest abilities that affect combat without conscious intervention, that's not violation, that's just natural manifestation during extreme stress. Understand the distinction. Understand are giving me permission to let whatever happens happen as long as I don't consciously break challenge rules. That's more permission than I expected to have. That's desperate second exploiting protocol loopholes because legitimate alpha needs every advantage against a treacherous brother. Vera's grin was fierce. Now watch, support through bond, and trust that Kalen knows what he's doing even when it looks like he's losing. Alpha King combat is rarely about who's winning at any given moment. It's about who wants victory more desperately when everything is on the line. The sun set, the full moon rose, and the challenge began. The transformation from human to wolf form happened simultaneously. Kalen and Damien shifting as moonrise triggered the ancient magic that governed challenge combat. But even in wolf form, the differences between them were obvious. Damien's wolf was larger, darker, showing no signs of recent injury or imprisonment. Kalen's was smaller, still bearing visible marks from the gold chains despite healing, moving with slight favor to one leg that suggested lingering damage. They'd fight as wolves first, that was tradition. Then as humans if wolf combat didn't establish clear dominance. The fight could last hours or end in minutes, depending on how evenly matched they were and how desperately each fought for victory. They circled each other warily, each looking for opening, each calculating odds and planning strategy. Then Damien attacked, fast, brutal, going straight for Kalen's throat with killing intent that showed this wasn't going to be dominance establishment combat. This was going to be fight to death regardless of submission offers. Kalen dodged, barely, using speed rather than strength to avoid the attack. He countered with strike to Damien's flank that drew first blood but didn't slow his brother's assault. They separated, circled again, and I felt Kalen's strategy through the bond. He was conserving strength, making Damien expend energy on attacks that looked dangerous but weren't actually connecting, waiting for his brother to tire before committing to full offense. It was smart strategy for a wounded fighter against stronger opponent. But it looked like he was losing, Damien landing more hits, drawing more blood, forcing Kalen to defend rather than attack. The crowd was murmuring, Damien's supporters gaining confidence, while Kalen's core wolves looked increasingly concerned. He's not losing, Vera said quietly beside me. He's letting Damien think he's winning while studying his patterns. Every attack Damien makes teaches Kalen something about his combat style, his automatic responses, his vulnerabilities. When Kalen's learned enough, that's when real fight begins. How long can he maintain defensive strategy while taking damage? He's wounded already. He can't afford to absorb much more before defensive approach becomes legitimate losing rather than just strategic delay. He knows his limits better than we do. Trust him. The combat continued, Damien pressing advantage, Kalen giving ground but never quite breaking, blood spattering stone circle as both wolves accumulated injuries. Then Kalen shifted strategy. Instead of just defending, he started countering, using Damien's aggressive attacks against him, finding openings in patterns he'd been studying, landing hits that were precisely targeted at vulnerable points rather than just random strikes. The momentum shifted. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Damien was now the one defending, forced to adjust strategy because Kalen had learned his patterns and was exploiting them. The crowd's murmuring changed tone, uncertainty replacing confidence as they watched combat they'd assumed would be straightforward become genuinely contested challenge. Now, Vera said with satisfaction, now he's showing what legitimate Alpha King can do when properly motivated. But Damien wasn't defeated yet. He adapted, changed his own strategy, started using combat techniques that weren't traditional challenge protocol. Dirty fighting, deliberate targeting of healing wounds, attacks that violated unspoken rules about what was acceptable in alpha combat. He's cheating, I said, watching Damien deliberately tear at the gold chain wounds that had nearly killed Kalen weeks ago. That's not allowed in challenge combat. It's not disallowed, just dishonorable. But dishonorable tactics still count as valid if they achieve victory. Kalen needs to adapt, or that targeting of old wounds will break through his defensive capabilities. Vera's concern was obvious now. Come on, adapt. Kalen did adapt, but the cost was clear. He was slowing, the old wounds reopening under Damien's assault, supernatural healing struggling to keep pace with damage being inflicted. He was still fighting, still dangerous, but losing ground to opponent who'd abandoned honor for pure survival pragmatism. And that's when I felt it, my dormant supernatural nature stirring, no longer just acknowledging existence, but actively preparing to manifest. Not because I consciously triggered it, but because the mate bond was screaming that Kalen was in genuine danger, that he might lose, that intervention was necessary regardless of protocol restrictions. Nancy, Vera's voice seemed distant. Nancy, your eyes, they're changing. What are you? I didn't answer because I couldn't articulate what was happening. My perspective was shifting, expanding, becoming aware of magical currents I'd never perceived before. The throne's ancient power flowing through the challenge circle, the pack bonds connecting every wolf present, the mate bond between Kalen and me that was currently conducting his pain and exhaustion directly into my awareness. And I realized I could affect those currents, could channel power through the mate bond, could amplify the throne's support of legitimate succession, could make Kalen stronger through connection we'd formed rather than just passively witnessing his combat. I didn't know how I was doing it, didn't understand the mechanism or the source of capability. But my dormant nature was activating exactly as Kalen had predicted, giving me access to abilities that had been sleeping my entire life. Power flowed through the mate bond. Not my power, but something I was channeling from the throne itself, from the ancient magic that recognized legitimate succession and wanted Kalen to win. I was conduit, amplifier, making the throne's subtle support significantly less subtle through bond connection that let me direct power precisely where it was needed. Kalen felt it immediately, surge of strength and healing that came from outside himself, that closed reopening wounds and renewed flagging energy. He looked toward me on the platform, saw whatever my manifesting supernatural nature looked like from outside, and his shock filtered through the bond before being replaced by fierce gratitude. That's not normal mate bond support, Vera breathed beside me. That's active power channeling using a bond as a transmission method. Nancy, what are you? I don't know. I said honestly, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. But whatever I am, it wants Kalen to win, and it's going to help make that happen. The combat shifted dramatically as Kalen's renewed strength became obvious. He was no longer defending against stronger opponent. He was attacking with energy and capability that matched Damien despite recent wounds and imprisonment. The throne's power flowing through me and through the mate bond was equalizing the fight, giving Kalen the advantage he needed to actually win rather than just survive. Damien recognized something had changed, his confident expression shifting to concern as his wounded brother suddenly fought like uninjured alpha in prime condition. He tried to adjust, tried to exploit vulnerabilities that no longer existed, but momentum had shifted irreversibly in Kalen's favor. The final exchange was almost anticlimactic. Damien overextended on desperate attack. Kalen dodged and countered with precision strike that sent his brother crashing to the ground, pinned beneath Kalen's wolf form with throat exposed in perfect position for killing blow. Submit. Kalen's human voice came from wolf throat, alpha magic allowing speech during shifted form. Submit or die. Those are only options remaining. Submit. Damien's voice was broken, defeated. I acknowledge your legitimate claim. I surrender authority. Yield. Kalen held the position for a moment longer, establishing dominance beyond any possible dispute, then released his brother and shifted back to human form. The crowd erupted. Kaelin's supporters celebrating victory. Damien's former loyalists scrambling to acknowledge new reality of restored legitimate succession. Everyone processing that Alpha King had reclaimed the throne through combat that should have been impossible given his recent condition. The throne recognizes Kaelin as legitimate Alpha King, Vera announced formally. Damien's claim is rejected. His authority is stripped. His rule is ended. Long live King Kaelin. Long live King Kaelin. The crowd echoed, the ancient words creating magical resonance that bound the outcome officially, making the challenge results permanent and uncontestable. I collapsed on the platform, whatever power I'd been channeling cutting off now that combat was finished. My dormant nature was reseeding again, satisfied that its intervention had achieved the necessary outcome, leaving me exhausted and confused about what I'd just done. Nancy! Kaelin was there immediately, climbing up to the platform despite his own exhaustion, pulling me against him with fierce relief. You did it. You channeled throne power through the bond. That's an incredibly rare capability that requires specific bloodline connection to throne magic. You're not just dormant supernatural. You're descended from ancient pack royalty. That's the only explanation for being able to channel throne power directly. I'm what? Descended from royalty? How is that possible when I've lived as normal human my entire life? We'll figure that out once we're not both about to collapse from exhaustion. For now, we won. You helped us win. And Damien is going to be dealt with according to pack law regarding fratricide attempts against legitimate rulers. Kaelin's satisfaction was obvious through the bond, despite his fatigue. Thank you for being exactly what I needed, for manifesting exactly when it mattered, for being mine despite every reason to reject the bond and this entire situation. You're welcome. Though I'm going to need detailed explanation about royalty bloodlines and throne magic and everything else once we've recovered from almost dying multiple times in the same week. Deal. Now, come on. Let's get both of us to healers before we celebrate properly. I want to be actually recovered before formal coronation reinstates me as Alpha King officially. There's going to be formal coronation? There's always a formal coronation after challenge combat. That's going to be interesting experience for newly awakened supernatural royal who doesn't know anything about protocol yet. Can't wait. Nothing says fun like a formal coronation ceremony when you've just discovered you're apparently descended from ancient pack royalty and can channel throne magic through mate bonds. That's the attitude. Welcome to being Alpha King's mate and supernatural royal in your own right. Your life is never going to be quiet isolation again. Good, I said, surprising myself with honesty. Quiet isolation was slowly killing me anyway. At least this way, I'm building something rather than just hiding from everything. That's perfect perspective. Kaelin kissed me gently despite the crowd watching. Now let's go claim our throne properly before I collapse from exhaustion and ruin the dramatic victory moment. Dramatic victory moments are overrated anyway. I prefer survival and successful resolution to dramatic finale that leaves everyone dead. Another perfect perspective. I knew you'd be excellent queen once you accepted the role. I haven't accepted being queen yet. I've just accepted being your mate and channeling throne magic when necessary. Those are different commitments. We'll work on that. You've got plenty of time to adjust to being royal while I'm being officially reinstated and Damien is being officially exiled. You're not executing him. I'm exiling him permanently from all pack territories with order that he's killed on sight if he returns. That's mercy I'm not obligated to offer, but that demonstrates I'm better ruler than he was. Real kings don't need to kill defeated opponents when permanent exile achieves same goal without additional bloodshed. That's very evolved perspective for someone who just fought brother to near death in Alpha King Combat Challenge. That's very practical perspective from someone who wants to rule through respect rather than through fear. Killing Damien creates martyr. Exiling him creates lesson about consequences of treason without creating sympathetic figure for opposition to rally around. We made it off the platform, through the celebrating crowd, to healers who immediately began treating both of us for combat injuries and magical exhaustion respectively. And for the first time since freeing Kalen from gold chains in Cursed Forest, I felt safe. Actually, genuinely safe. Not temporarily protected, but permanently secure in ways that grief-induced isolation had never provided. I'd freed a chained Alpha King, discovered I was his fated mate, awakened dormant supernatural nature I'd been carrying unknowingly, and helped him reclaim stolen throne through channeling ancient power I didn't understand, but apparently had hereditary right to access. That was more transformation than anyone should experience in a single week. But it was good transformation, necessary change that moved me from slowly dying of grief to actively building future with mate who'd proven he was worth the risk I'd taken freeing him. Whatever came next, formal coronations, royal protocols, detailed explanations about my bloodline heritage, would be manageable as long as we faced it together. That was what mate bonds were supposed to provide. Partnership that made impossible circumstances bearable, connection that made isolation obsolete, love that justified taking risks that logic said were terrible ideas. I'd freed Kalen because I couldn't watch him die alone. And that choice, that compassionate, impulsive, grief-motivated decision, had led to this. Sitting beside him while healers worked, feeling the mate bond hum with satisfaction, knowing that whatever future held would be faced together rather than alone. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything I needed without knowing I needed it. 3 weeks after the challenge combat, I stood in a formal coronation chamber wearing dress that cost more than my old cabin and feeling completely out of place despite having spent those 3 weeks receiving intensive training in supernatural royal protocol. "You look terrified," Kalen observed, appearing beside me dressed in formal Alpha King regalia that made him look powerful and intimidating and very different from the dying wolf I'd freed from chains a month ago. That's normal for first formal court appearance as an acknowledged mate and awakened royal. Most people are terrified their first time facing assembled pack leadership as equals rather than as civilians. I'm not terrified of assembled pack leadership. I'm terrified of being expected to know protocols I've just learned, to represent bloodline heritage I just discovered, to be queen when a month ago I was a grieving widow living in isolation. My honesty was sharp with anxiety. How am I supposed to do this convincingly when I still feel like fraud pretending to be supernatural royal? You do it by remembering you're not pretending. You are supernatural royal. Your bloodline connection to throne magic was proven when you channeled power during combat. The genetics testing confirmed you're descended from pack royalty that went dormant generations ago. And you're my mate, which gives you authority regardless of bloodline considerations. Those aren't pretenses. Those are facts that make you legitimate whether you feel legitimate or not. Facts don't change that I'm terrified of failing publicly during coronation ceremony that will be witnessed by hundreds of supernatural dignitaries I've never met. Then fail publicly and recover gracefully. That's what being royal actually means. Not perfection, but resilience. Not flawless performance, but authentic presence despite imperfection. Kalen's hand found mine. You freed me from dying in chains. You ran from assassins. You were interrogated and threatened. You channeled throne power to help me win impossible combat. You've already proven you're resilient beyond normal standards. Coronation ceremony is just formal recognition of what you've already demonstrated through actions. The hard part is over. This is just pageantry. Pageantry that determines whether hundreds of supernatural dignitaries accept me as legitimate queen or reject me as human interloper who doesn't belong. That's not just anything. That's significant political determination that affects how they treat both of us going forward. They'll accept you because rejecting an acknowledged mate of Alpha King would be rejecting me by extension. That's political suicide for anyone who wants continued positive relationship with Northern Territories. You're safe through association, even if they privately question your qualifications. Kalen's reassurance was practical rather than comforting, but somehow that helped more than empty platitudes would have. Now come on. Ceremony begins in 10 minutes, and we need to process it in exactly correct order to maintain proper protocol symbolism. The coronation ceremony was exactly as elaborate and intimidating as I'd feared. Hundreds of wolves and other supernatural beings assembled in massive throne room, all of them watching as Kalen and I entered in formal procession that involved specific walking pace, specific positioning relative to each other, and specific acknowledgement gestures to various pack leaders as we passed. I managed not to trip over my elaborate dress, managed not to accidentally insult anyone through incorrect gesture execution, and managed not to panic visibly despite internal terror about making a mistake that would embarrass both of us. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The throne itself was impressive. Ancient carved stone that radiated power. I could sense now that my supernatural nature was active, symbols covering every surface that depicted 12 generations of legitimate succession leading to Kalen's rightful claim. I could feel the throne recognizing us both. Kalen as direct descendant and rightful ruler, me as mate and dormant royal bloodline carrier who'd reactivated after generations of sleeping. The throne accepts both of you, the ceremony officiator announced. Old wolf named Elder Thomas, who'd been conducting coronations for 3 generations of Alpha Kings. King Kalen as rightful heir and proven combat victor, and Queen Nancy as acknowledged mate and awakened royal bloodline carrier. Do you, King Kalen, accept the responsibilities of ruling northern territories with wisdom, strength, and dedication to pack welfare? I accept, Kalen said formally, his voice carrying authority that made everyone present feel the weight of his commitment. Do you, Queen Nancy, accept the responsibilities of supporting the throne, maintaining royal bloodline heritage, and serving pack interests alongside your mate? I hesitated, not because I disagreed, but because accepting meant admitting this was permanent, that I was choosing supernatural royal life over any possibility of returning to normal human existence, that I was committing to Kalen and to his kingdom fully rather than just temporarily participating while figuring out what I actually wanted. Nancy, Kalen's voice through the bond was gentle. You don't have to accept. If you want more time to decide, if you want different life than being queen, we'll find alternative. But if you're hesitating because you're scared rather than because you genuinely don't want this, then be scared and accept anyway. Fear is normal. Letting fear prevent you from choosing what you actually want is. That's self-sabotage that causes regret later. He was right. I was scared, but I wasn't actually uncertain about what I wanted. I've been building toward this from the moment I freed him from chains. Every choice, every decision, every moment of choosing partnership over isolation had been moving toward accepting that maybe I could be queen despite grief and terror and complete lack of preparation. I accept, I said clearly, letting my voice carry across the assembled crowd. I accept the responsibilities, the commitments, the terrifying reality of being queen when I don't entirely understand what that means yet. I accept because being scared of new life is better than being slowly killed by isolation and grief. I accept because Kalen is worth the risk. I accept because I've already proven I can handle impossible circumstances. I accept. The throne pulsed with approval, actual magical response to my acceptance, confirming that this wasn't just ceremonial words, but binding commitment that the ancient power recognized as legitimate. The crowd responded with formal acknowledgement that ranged from enthusiastic approval from Kalen's core supporters to polite obligation from wolves who'd previously backed Damien. King Kalen and Queen Nancy are recognized as legitimate rulers of northern territories by throne authority and by assembled witnesses, Elder Thomas announced. Long live the king and queen. Long live the king and queen, the crowd echoed, the ritual words binding the coronation magically and making our positions official beyond any further dispute. It was done. I was queen, officially, magically, permanently. No more grieving widow hiding in isolation. No more ordinary human pretending supernatural complications didn't exist. No more avoiding commitment because fear of loss was easier than risk of connection. I was Queen Nancy, mate to Alpha King Kaelin, awakened supernatural royal with dormant bloodline heritage, and woman who'd proven she was brave enough to free dying alphas from magical torture chains despite every logical reason to walk away. After the ceremony, during the formal reception that involved meeting approximately 200 supernatural dignitaries whose names I'd never remember, Vera pulled me aside with expression of satisfaction. You did well. Better than most first-time queens manage during coronation and formal introduction to supernatural high society. Some of them faint, some panic, some refuse to continue halfway through ceremony. You committed fully and handled everything with composure despite obvious terror. That's impressive. I was too scared to panic. That's different from actual composure. Doesn't matter. What matters is you appeared composed, which is all that's required for political purposes. Whether you felt composed internally is irrelevant to external assessment of your capabilities. Vera's pragmatism was weirdly reassuring. Now, we need to discuss your bloodline heritage. The genetics testing revealed you're descended from Queen Anastasia, who ruled Northern Territories 400 years ago before her bloodline went dormant through intermarriage with human lines. That makes you significantly more royal than we anticipated when you first freed Kaelin. You're not just mate who can channel throne power. You're a direct royal descendant who has hereditary right to throne authority independent of mate bond connection. I'm descended from actual queen. How do my family not know? How did I grow up as normal human without anyone recognizing supernatural heritage? Your bloodline went dormant for generations. Each generation became more human, less supernatural, until your parents were essentially human with trace supernatural genetics that manifested only under extreme circumstances. You activating was unprecedented reawakening of a bloodline that everyone assumed was permanently extinct. Vera was pulling out documents that apparently contain my complete genetic analysis. This is a significant discovery that changes political dynamics substantially. You're not just Kaelin's mate and convenient queen. You're a legitimate royal heir to throne that's been held by a combination of Kaelin's bloodline and your bloodline historically. That makes your bonding to Kaelin even more magically significant than random mate bond. It's the reunification of royal bloodlines that were separated 4 centuries ago. So, I was always supposed to end up here. My bloodline and Kaelin's bloodline were, destined to reconnect? That's fate operating on centuries-long timeline rather than just individual lives. That's exactly what it is. The throne has been waiting for this reunion, which is why it responded so powerfully when you channeled its magic. It recognized you as part of legitimate succession that it's been trying to restore for 400 years. You freeing Kaelin wasn't coincidence. It was destiny manifesting through circumstances that looked random, but were actually guided by throne magic, ensuring bloodlines reconnected properly. I need to sit down. That's too much significance to process, standing up wearing formal dress in middle of coronation reception. Sitting is acceptable. Being overwhelmed is acceptable. You've learned more about your identity in past month than most people learn in entire lives. That's exhausting beyond just physical fatigue. Vera guided me to quieter corner where I could process without dozens of dignitaries watching. Take time to adjust. You have rest of your life to understand full implications of bloodline reunion and supernatural heritage awakening. For now, just be queen. That's sufficient accomplishment for someone who was a human civilian a month ago. Kaelin found me in the quiet corner, having escaped his own mob of dignitaries seeking favor with a newly crowned king. He sat beside me, with relief obvious in his expression. Vera told you about Anastasia's bloodline. She told me I'm descended from the queen who ruled 400 years ago, that our bonding reunites bloodlines that were separated, and that apparently the throne has been engineered to make this happen for centuries. That's a lot. That's destiny operating on scale most people never experience. But Nancy, he took my hand carefully, it doesn't change who you are fundamentally. You're still a woman who freed me from chains because compassion mattered more than safety. You're still a partner who ran from assassins and channeled throne power and accepted being queen despite terror. The bloodline heritage just explains how you could do those things, not why you chose to. Your choices were yours regardless of genetic destiny. That's actually reassuring distinction. I was worried the bloodline thing meant I never had choice, that everything was predetermined by genetics and throne magic. But if the bloodline just enabled choices I was making anyway, that's different. That's me having agency within larger pattern rather than just being manipulated by forces I don't control. Exactly. You had agency every step, freeing me, accepting the bond, channeling throne power, becoming queen, all choices you made consciously despite alternatives being available. The bloodline enabled those choices to work magically, but it didn't force you to make them. That's an important distinction for maintaining a sense of self while adjusting to royal identity. You're very wise for someone who spent 6 weeks dying in gold chains being tortured by a treacherous brother. I'm very practiced at maintaining identity despite external circumstances trying to destroy it. That's a useful perspective for helping a mate who's adjusting to massive identity revelation. Kalen stood, offering his hand. Come on, we've fulfilled formal coronation obligations. Let's escape this reception and go somewhere private where you can process everything without audience of supernatural dignitaries evaluating your every reaction. Escaping sounds perfect. Where are we going? To royal chambers that are now officially ours, where you can take off that elaborate dress, collapse on comfortable furniture, and ask me approximately 1,000 questions about bloodline heritage, throne magic, and everything else you've discovered today. That's better use of our time than continued small talk with wolves who just want political access to newly crowned monarchs. We escaped through side door that apparently only royal family was allowed to use, leaving reception behind despite protocol, suggesting we should stay until very end. But one advantage of being actual monarchs was that we could adjust protocol when circumstances required, and I required not being surrounded by hundreds of watching dignitaries while processing overwhelming identity revelations. The royal chambers were expansive, private, and significantly more comfortable than anywhere else I'd been in the past month. I collapsed on an elaborate couch immediately, too exhausted to maintain formal posture any longer. Ask your questions, Kalen said, sitting beside me. Whatever you need to understand about bloodline heritage, about throne magic, about being queen, ask. I'll answer as completely as I can. Question 1. Am I immortal now that supernatural heritage is active? Because that's significant concern given I've been processing mortality and grief for 3 years. You're not immortal, but you're significantly longer lived than humans. Supernatural royals typically live 3 to 4 centuries if they avoid violence. That's enough time to do everything you want without rushing, but not so long that relationships become meaningless through eternal duration. 3 to 4 centuries. That's manageable. Better than a human lifespan of maybe 90 years if I'm lucky. Though it means I'll outlive all the human connections I still maintain from my previous life. That's the unfortunate reality of awakening supernatural heritage. Human connections become temporary while supernatural ones become permanent. But you'll build new connections, new relationships, new family among pack who will live similar time spans. That's adjustment, but it's manageable when you have support. Question 2. What powers do I have beyond channeling throne magic? Because that's one capability. Are there others? You're still discovering your full capabilities. But preliminary assessment suggests you have standard royal bloodline abilities, enhanced strength and speed beyond human norms, advanced healing that's not quite as fast as shapeshifter healing, but significantly better than human regeneration, ability to sense supernatural beings and their intentions, and apparently talent for magical channeling that goes beyond just throne power. You'll develop those abilities gradually as your supernatural nature fully awakens from dormancy. That's a process that takes months to years, not instant manifestation. So I'm going to keep discovering new abilities for years. That's actually exciting rather than terrifying. It means I'm never done growing, never finished developing, never static in capabilities. That's better than being limited to whatever I had at moment of awakening. That's excellent perspective. Most newly awakened supernaturals are frustrated by gradual development rather than instant full capability. You're embracing the growth process. That's a mature approach that will serve you well as queen. Question 3. Are we going to have children eventually? Because that's significant commitment beyond just mate bonding and ruling together. That's creating future generation of royal bloodline reunion. And I don't know if I'm ready for that conversation yet. We'll have children if and when you're ready. No pressure, no timeline, no obligation beyond what you choose freely. Throne benefits from heirs, but it doesn't require them immediately. We have centuries to build family if that's what you want, or to remain just us if you prefer not to have children. That's your choice as much as mine. This is a partnership where both opinions matter equally on significant decisions. You're very progressive about reproductive autonomy for Alpha King, who needs heirs to continue bloodline succession. I'm practical about reproductive autonomy because forcing unwanted parenthood creates resentment that damages relationships and produces children who feel obligated rather than wanted. That's terrible foundation for family regardless of political necessity. We'll figure out children if and when that becomes something you actually want rather than just something you feel obligated to provide. Thank you for giving me choice rather than just expecting compliance with royal reproduction obligations. You're welcome. Though I should mention, I do want children eventually. But eventually can be years or decades depending on when you're emotionally ready. I can be patient about this the same way I was patient about you accepting the queen role. Good things are worth waiting for. I leaned against him, processing everything. Bloodline heritage, 3-century lifespan, developing supernatural abilities, potential future children that weren't obligatory but were desired eventually. It was overwhelming and perfect simultaneously. Thank you, I said finally, for being exactly what I needed when I needed it, for surviving long enough that freeing you mattered, for building partnership that makes impossible circumstances manageable, for being worth the risk I took cutting those chains. Thank you for being brave enough to cut them despite every logical reason not to, for choosing compassion over safety, for being exactly what I needed without knowing you were exactly what I needed, for being mine and letting me be yours despite everything being complicated and terrifying and absolutely not what either of us expected our lives to become. Our lives are better for being complicated and terrifying together than they were for being simple and isolated separately. Agreed. Now rest. Sleep. Let yourself adjust to being queen without pressure to perform or conform immediately. We have rest of our extremely long lives to figure out how to do this well. For now, we survived. That's sufficient accomplishment. Sufficient accomplishment, I repeated sleepily. I freed a chained Alpha King, discovered I'm supernatural royalty, channeled throne magic, became queen, and committed to centuries-long partnership. That's more than sufficient. That's absolutely absurd amount of life transformation in single month. Best month of my life despite, including torture, near death, and combat with treacherous brother. That's testimony to how significant you are to me. Best month of my life despite everything too. That's testimony to how significant you are to me. We fell asleep together. King and queen, mates and partners, bloodlines reunited after 400 years of separation. And for the first time since my husband's death 3 years ago, I felt at peace with my life, with my choices, with my future. I freed something powerful when I cut those gold chains. Something that woke up and changed everything. But what woke up wasn't just Kalen's release from imprisonment. What woke up was my own dormant nature, my own supernatural heritage, my own capacity for building future that was worth living rather than just surviving. That was the real power I'd unleashed. Not just Alpha King's resurrection, but my own transformation from broken widow into confident queen. And that was worth every terrifying moment, every overwhelming revelation, every impossible circumstance that had led here. Absolutely worth it. 5 years later, I stood in the garden overlooking the Northern Territory's capital, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded me of the gold chains I'd cut 5 years ago in Cursed Forest. So much had changed since that day. A grief-stricken widow had become confident queen. An isolated cabin dweller had become a supernatural royal with responsibilities spanning the entire kingdom. And most significantly, woman who thought she'd never love again had built a partnership that exceeded anything she'd experienced in her human life. Deep thoughts. Kalen joined me in the garden, his presence immediately comforting through the mate bond that had only grown stronger over 5 years together. Reflective thoughts. 5-year anniversary of freeing you from chains is tomorrow. Seemed appropriate to spend evening processing how completely my life has transformed since making that impulsive decision to help dying wolf. I leaned against him naturally, comfortable in ways I'd never been with anyone else. Do you ever regret it? Being freed by random human civilian who didn't understand what she was releasing, who didn't know anything about supernatural politics, who was completely unprepared for becoming queen. I regret nothing about being freed by exactly the right person at exactly the right time, regardless of her preparedness or understanding. You've been a perfect queen despite having no training or expectations when you started. Better than most queens who've had entire lives to prepare for the role. That's testament to who you are fundamentally rather than what circumstances prepared you for. I've made approximately 1,000 mistakes in 5 years. That's not perfect by any reasonable standard. You've made mistakes and learned from them without letting them define you or prevent you from continuing to grow. That's better than perfection. That's resilience, adaptation, genuine development rather than just flawless performance. You're effective because you're authentic, not because you're perfect. You're very philosophical this evening. I'm grateful this evening. 5 years ago, I was dying in chains, expecting to die alone and forgotten. Now I'm Alpha King with mate I adore, kingdom that's stable and prosperous, and future that looks significantly better than any outcome I could have predicted from that starting point. Kalen pulled me closer. You gave me that. Your compassion, your bravery, your willingness to cut chains when walking away would have been safer choice. That's gift beyond measure. You gave me life worth living when grief was slowly killing me. That's equally valuable gift, pulling me back from isolation that was comfortable but ultimately destructive. We saved each other. That's what makes partnership work. Mutual rescue rather than one-sided salvation. Mutual rescue. I like that framing. We stood in comfortable silence, watching sunset complete its transformation of sky from day to evening. 5 years had brought so much. Formal alliances with neighboring territories, successful integration of my awakened bloodline heritage into kingdom governance, development of my supernatural abilities from barely controlled channeling to actual mastery of throne magic, and most recently, serious discussions about whether we were ready to start building family beyond just our partnership. "I think I'm ready," I said abruptly, voicing thought that had been developing for months. 4 children. For building family. 4. For creating next generation of bloodline reunion that apparently took 4 centuries to achieve. "I think I'm ready to be mother as well as queen." Kalen's joy filtered through the bond before his words could articulate response. "Are you certain? Because that's significant commitment beyond what we have now. I want you to be genuinely ready rather than just feeling obligated, because 5 years seems like appropriate timeline for reproduction." "I'm certain, not because of obligation or timeline, but because I've healed enough from my grief, developed enough capability and confidence, built enough stable foundation that adding children feels like natural growth rather than overwhelming complication. I want to build family with you. Want to create a future generation that inherits both our bloodlines, both our capabilities, both our commitment to ruling well and building lasting legacy. I want that. Actively, consciously, without reservation or doubt. Then we start building family. Properly, intentionally, with full acknowledgement that this is choice we're making together because we both want it rather than because the kingdom needs heirs." Kalen kissed me gently. "Thank you for being ready, for choosing this, for trusting that we can do this well despite neither of us having traditional preparation for supernatural royal parenting. We'll figure out the same way we've figured out everything else, through trial and error, through supporting each other, through being willing to adapt when circumstances don't match expectations. That's been our approach to everything. Why would parenting be different? It wouldn't be. That's reassuring consistency. Over the next year, everything changed again. Pregnancy that was simultaneously easier and harder than human pregnancy. Childbirth that required supernatural healers, because half-human royal babies were apparently more complicated than standard pack births. And adjustment to having infant who demanded attention while still maintaining queen responsibilities and kingdom governance. Our daughter, Anastasia, named for the queen whose bloodline I carried, was perfect combination of both our heritages. Human appearance with supernatural capabilities, Kalen's amber eyes with my darker coloring, and personality that suggested she'd inherited both our stubbornness and neither of our patience. She was everything I'd hoped for without knowing what to hope for when it came to children. "She's remarkable," Vera observed during one of her regular visits to check on royal family welfare. "Strong, healthy, already showing signs of significant magical capability despite being only 3 months old. That's testament to bloodline reunion creating powerful offspring. She's going to be a formidable queen when her time comes to inherit. Let's let her be formidable infant first before planning her eventual coronation," I said while managing the aforementioned formidable infant who was currently demanding food with supernatural enhanced volume. "She has centuries before inheritance becomes relevant. That's plenty of time for her to develop into whoever she's meant to be without rushing toward predetermined destiny." Fair point. Though the bloodline reunion has created significant interest among supernatural communities beyond just northern territories. Other kingdoms want alliances, want connections to royal line that apparently carries more power than anyone anticipated. That's a political complication you'll be managing for decades. We've handled political complications before. This is just a different category of political complication that involves our daughter instead of just us. We'll figure it out. My confidence wasn't bravado. It was genuine certainty that we could handle whatever circumstances required because we'd proven capable of adapting to impossible situations repeatedly. 5 years after that, when Anastasia was old enough to understand stories about her parents' unlikely bonding, I told her the truth about how we met. Not sanitized fairy tale, but actual account of gold chains and cursed forest, of assassination attempts and underground prisons, of challenge combat and coronation ceremonies that changed everything. "So you freed Papa because you couldn't watch him die Anastasia summarized with 6-year-old directness. Even though it was dangerous and you didn't know who he was. Exactly. I freed him because compassion mattered more than safety. Because I'd spent 3 years watching myself die, slowly from grief, and I couldn't let someone else die slowly when I had tools to help. That was most important decision I ever made, even though it seemed like small choice at the time. Was it scary? Freeing him? Terrifying. I had no idea what would happen, whether he'd attack me, whether freeing him would create more problems than leaving him chained. But I was already numb from grief. Terror was at least feeling something real rather than just existing in careful emotional management. So yes, it was scary, but scary was better than numb. And then you became queen even though you didn't know how to be queen. Then I became queen and figured out how to do it through trial and error and help from people who knew more than I did. That's an important lesson about capabilities. You don't have to know how to do something before starting. You just have to be willing to learn, to make mistakes, to adapt when circumstances don't match expectations. That's how growth happens, through doing things you're not prepared for and figuring them out anyway. I want to be brave like you, Anastasia said seriously. I want to free people from chains and become queen and do things I'm not prepared for. You're already brave. You just haven't encountered circumstances yet that require you to demonstrate it. But when you do, when you find your metaphorical dying wolf in metaphorical gold chains, you'll make the right choice because you're your parents' daughter and we raised you to value compassion over safety, growth over comfort, connection over isolation. That's what matters. Not specific circumstances you encounter, but how you respond when circumstances require courage you didn't know you possessed. That night, after Anastasia was asleep and Kalen and I had rare moment of privacy, he brought up a question that had apparently been on his mind for weeks. Do you regret any of it? The transformation, the responsibility, the loss of human life you could have had if you just kept walking past those chains. I regret nothing. Some days are hard. Some responsibilities feel overwhelming. Some aspects of queen life are challenging in ways human life never was. But regret? No. I got partnership worth having, a daughter who's remarkable, life that's meaningful rather than just managed. That's worth every difficult moment, every overwhelming responsibility, every challenge I face as queen. I'd make same choice again. Every time. Good. Because I'd choose you again too. Every time. Regardless of circumstances, regardless of alternatives, regardless of easier paths that might have existed. You're exactly the right partner for building this life, for ruling this kingdom, for creating this family. That's not compromise or settling. That's genuine preference for you specifically rather than just acceptance of mate bond pairing. That's very romantic declaration for Alpha King, known for tactical ruthlessness. I'm romantic toward my mate and ruthless toward everyone else. That's been consistent for 10 years now. You should have adjusted to that personality division by this point. I have adjusted. I'm just never letting you forget that you're capable of romance when motivated. That's valuable information for future negotiations when I need emotional concessions from an otherwise tactical monarch. Emotional negotiations are a valid strategy. I approve. 10 years after freeing Kalen from gold chains, I stood in the same garden overlooking the capital, now watching our second child, son named Michael after the saint rather than after anyone in either of our families, chase his sister through an elaborate game that apparently involved both supernatural speed and creative rule interpretation. They're going to destroy the carefully maintained garden landscaping, Kalen observed with amusement rather than concern. That's inevitable when you have two supernatural royal children using enhanced capabilities for childhood games. They're building relationships through play that will serve them well as adults. That's worth some destroyed landscaping. I was at peace with chaos our children created, with the imperfection of supernatural royal family life, with reality that being queen meant accepting that not everything could be controlled or perfected. Besides, landscapers are experienced at repairing supernatural child damage by now. This is hardly the first time our children have enthusiastically reshaped garden through overly energetic play. Fair point. Though I maintain that we should establish some boundaries about acceptable garden destruction versus unacceptable garden destruction before they're old enough to cause permanent magical alterations to landscape. Boundaries are a reasonable goal. We'll work on that after they're done with current game and hopefully before they discover new creative ways to apply developing magical capabilities to garden modification. Life was good, not perfect. Perfection was impossible with two young supernatural royals, with kingdom governance requiring constant attention, with balance between queen responsibilities and mother responsibilities being perpetual negotiation. But good. Better than anything I'd imagined when I'd been grieving a widow in isolated cabin, convinced the best years of her life were behind her. I freed something powerful when I cut those gold chains. Something that changed everything. Not just Kalen's life, but my own. Not just immediate circumstances, but entire trajectory of my future. Not just survival, but actual thriving in ways I'd thought impossible after my first husband's death. That was the real magic of mate bonds and bloodline reunions and supernatural transformations. Not the power itself, but what the power enabled. Connection, growth, family, future worth building rather than just enduring. I'd been Nancy Close, grieving widow hiding from life in isolated cabin at the edge of cursed forest. Now I was Queen Nancy, supernatural royal, mother of remarkable children, mate to Alpha King who'd proven worth every risk I'd taken to free him. That was a transformation beyond anything fantasy stories promised. Real magic, real power, real love built through choosing courage over comfort repeatedly over years rather than just once in dramatic moment. The gold chains have been meant to kill Kalen slowly, to ensure he died alone and forgotten, to prevent him from reclaiming the stolen throne. Instead, they become catalyst for his rescue, for bloodline reunion that had been 4 centuries in the making, for partnership that produced the next generation of powerful royal heirs. Damien had intended those chains to be instrument of death. Instead, they become instrument of destiny, bringing together bloodlines that were meant to be united, creating future neither Kalen nor I had imagined possible when we'd met as dying wolf and grieving widow in cursed forest. That was beautiful irony. Treacherous brothers' attempt to ensure permanent elimination, instead creating circumstances that led to stronger succession, more powerful bloodline, better future for entire kingdom. Sometimes fate worked through terrible circumstances to create outcomes no one could have predicted. Sometimes the worst moments led to best transformations. Sometimes cutting chains that were meant to kill led to waking power that changed everything. I'd freed a chained white wolf decaying in gold chains, and it unleashed something powerful. Not just the wolf's resurrection, but my own awakening. Not just a survival, but our thriving. Not just ending of one chapter, but beginning of story that was still being written 10 years later. That was legacy worth celebrating, worth protecting, worth passing on to children who would inherit both our bloodlines and our commitment to choosing courage over comfort, compassion over safety, connection over isolation. That was what it meant to free something powerful and watch it wake up. Not just witnessing transformation, but participating in it. Not just observing change, but becoming changed. Not just surviving circumstances, but thriving through them. I'd done that. We'd done that together. And we'd keep doing it for centuries to come. Because that's what it meant to be mates, partners, family-building legacy that lasted beyond any individual lifetime. That's what it meant to cut chains and unleash power that changed everything. Forever. Nancy freed a chained white wolf, decaying in gold chains, and it woke up something powerful. Not just Alpha King Kalen, but her own dormant supernatural heritage. 10 years later, they're ruling together with 2 remarkable children, bloodlines reunited after 400 years, creating a legacy that started with one compassionate decision in Curse Forest. From grieving widow to confident queen, from isolation to family, from nearly dying to absolutely thriving. Hit that like button if you loved this transformation from chains to crowns. Subscribe for more stories about waking up powerful things through acts of desperate compassion. Remember, sometimes freeing dying wolves in cursed forests leads to becoming supernatural royalty and living happily ever after for centuries.